In a world filled with dirt, being stupid is a privilege, while the smart must exert. A certain scientist stumbled upon a theory, something so intriguing, yet shrouded in mystery, the prison planet theory. At its core, the theory claims that the planet is nothing but a cosmic prison, a place where humans are trapped in an endless cycle of reincarnation. When a person dies, their soul is wiped clean of memories, only to be reborn once again in this world, cursed to live a life with no purpose or true meaning. Even though this notion was something most scientists would laugh at without giving it much thought, this particular scientist decided to delve into it, living up to the mad scientist nickname given to him by his colleagues and the public. And so, he began his search, driven by the need to uncover the truth, if any, buried beneath the hypothesis. His perspective was always unique. While others gazed at the stars, lost in wonder at what lay beyond, he walked the earth, following clues hidden beneath the vast blue sky. As they built rockets to explore distant planets, he studied ancient texts, searching for forgotten wisdom from civilizations that spoke of worlds beyond their own. While they mapped the stars with machines and science, he wandered through ruins, listening to the whispers of the past, believing the answers were closer than anyone realized. And finally, after years of relentless effort, exhausting his resources, and dedicating his life, he found what he had been searching for. Some might call it an invention, others a discovery. But those labels meant little in the grand scheme. What truly mattered was that he had found a small tear in the fabric of the world, like a crack in the walls of a prison, a rift leading to the other side of existence. He had spent most of his life searching for this rift. Now that he had found it, he was determined to spend the rest of his journey exploring whatever lay beyond. But before he could begin, there were two crucial questions he needed to answer, no matter the cost. Yet, he never got the chance to find the answers, as things took an unexpected turn. Not a single soul, not even the mad scientist himself, could understand when or why it started, but it all happened in an instant. One moment, the sky was filled with countless streaks of light, zipping across the heavens like falling stars, leaving glowing trails behind. The next, those trails crashed into the earth, vanishing in a blinding flash before the ground erupted with violent explosions. This was it. A world war was in the making, and this time, it wasn't swords being wielded but humanity's deadliest weapons, nuclear warheads. Until now, no one had ever doubted the destructive force of a single nuclear missile. No one questioned what the detonation of thousands of them could unleash upon the planet. But alas, they were still forced to experience this catastrophe as their reality, as if proving what they already knew. In a single night, cities were reduced to rubble, homes becoming tombs for their inhabitants. Rivers and lakes vanished, leaving only deep craters in their place. Forests turned into fiery graves, consuming the lives within. The moment was hellish, and the aftermath was no kinder. Governments fell, nations split, and order was completely destroyed. While some perished in the explosions, countless others fell in the years that followed, victims of hunger, lack of shelter, and the deadly diseases unleashed by radiation and chemical weapons that had tainted the land. Humanity had brought its end upon itself, yet, fortunately, hope had not been fully extinguished. Humans have always been a species that learns from their mistakes, grows through challenges, and emerges from the ashes. And this time was no different. After many years, people began to emerge from their shelters. Among them, 12 stood out. They weren't just wise enough to build underground bunkers and survive the catastrophe. They also had the resources, influence, and leadership needed to begin rebuilding humanity. In a world scarred by wounds and limited in resources, each of them claimed a territory for themselves, using all the means at their disposal. They constructed shelter cities, restoring order and creating a place where humans could once again thrive in society. Many years passed, and under the leadership of these individuals, who would later be known as the city managers, life on the planet gradually returned to a semblance of normal, though it was never quite the same as it had been before. They built monuments everywhere, offering daily sermons to remind people of their past mistakes and vow never to repeat them. But there was still something they had long since forgotten. The once famous mad scientist had vanished from the collective memory of the people, just as he had disappeared in the explosions that marked that fateful day. No one truly knew what he had discovered, and no one had the chance to answer the two questions he had asked himself that day. Is Earth truly a prison built to trap humanity for eternity? And, if Earth is indeed a prison for our souls, what choices or mistakes led us to be imprisoned here? Until August 10th, Year 215 of the Requiem calendar. University campus, Shelter City 9. I told you to stay the hell away from her, didn't I? The words barely left his mouth before his fist collided with the other boy's gut. The boy gasped, body folding from the impact, just in time for another fist to smash into his face and send him crashing to the cold, hard floor. Books and papers flew everywhere, skidding along the ground. Their clatter was met with a few snickers from the watching students. But the boy remained indifferent, as if he were accustomed to this treatment, and began to gather the scattered items from the ground. Cole hovered above him, still fuming. What, you think this is a joke? He snapped, cracking his knuckles. You deaf or just stupid? Grabbing a fistful of the boy's messy black hair, he yanked his head back, forcing him to look up. Then, without hesitation, he drove his fist into his face. A few drops of blood splattered onto the floor. The boy went still. His shoulders gave a small twitch. His dull, dark brown eyes flicked toward the blood. Then, nothing, just a slow breath, as if the whole thing was no more than a mild annoyance. He wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand, barely glancing up. I thought you genetic salads were supposed to be stronger, he muttered, voice calm and flat, almost bored as he went back to gathering his scattered belongings. What the hell did you just say? Cole demanded, stunned. I said, the boy replied, still not looking at him. Even my pure-blood little sister hits harder than you, moron. You little. Cole's voice cracked with fury. No begging, no panic, just calm, biting insults. His fists hadn't broken him. His threats had fallen flat. And now this reject had the nerve to mock him. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, especially not some dirt-blood nobody. The humiliation twisted in his gut, feeding the fire of his wounded pride. Grinding his teeth, hands trembling with fury, he lifted his foot, ready to slam it down on the boy's head and finish it. Just then, a voice broke the tension. Hey, Cole, that's enough, one of his buddies said, stepping forward with a nervous glance. He's had it. Yeah man, chill, someone else muttered, shifting uncomfortably. Sure, he's a freak, but he's also Victor's close friend. Keep pushing, and we're the ones who'll end up in deep shit. Cole paused, his foot still raised mid-air, his jaw clenched, frustration boiling in his eyes. But the warning sank in. With a grunt, he slowly let his foot fall to the ground and backed off, giving the freak one last glare. Let's go, he muttered and turned away. The others followed, a couple throwing uneasy glances back as they trailed after him. And just like that, the hallway emptied, leaving only silence and a mess of scattered pages behind. The boy didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, he gathered the last of his belongings and stood. Guess no one taught them to never mess with the quiet guy at school. He chuckled only to wince as a sharp sting shot through his lip. He brought a hand to his mouth and felt the blood. For a second, he stared at the red smudge on his fingers. Something about the color. It was oddly soothing. He brushed his hand across his mouth, tasting the faint iron as he exhaled. Doesn't hit the same anymore, he murmured. Might be time to pick up a new hobby. And without another word, he turned and walked off as if none of it had happened. He had barely taken a few steps when a loud, familiar voice called out, Hey, dear. Turning his head, he spotted the source, another student, barely a meal away from being called skinny. The boy was already striding toward him, his pace quick and unburdened, a wide, foolish grin plastered across his face. Yo, Victor, thought you'd already gone home, Adir said, a faint, perfectly fake smirk tugging at his busted lips. Nah, class ended a while ago, came the response, the guy looking him over with a casual gaze. When his eyes landed on the cut, he grinned wider. Damn, man, got your ass kicked again. That's what you get for messing with the queen of the school, huh? He slapped Adir's shoulder, chuckling. Adir shrugged, not missing a beat. Told you, it's not like that. I'm just helping her with piano lessons, he replied, trying to sound as uninterested as possible. He acted like the rumors didn't bother him, but deep down, he knew exactly what he was doing. He thrived on the attention, especially the kind that came from the bullies. He wasn't a masochist who enjoyed being beaten, but the pain was a method, a way to keep his addiction at bay. Since his reincarnation on this parallel Earth 18 years ago, he'd promised himself he wouldn't take any lives yet. That promise left a gnawing emptiness inside him, one he still had to manage. Breaking an addiction was never easy. Yeah, whatever, Victor said dismissively, waving off Adir's response. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Maybe next time, teach her something with wind instruments. Who knows, maybe she's better at blowing, he chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. Adir didn't even spare him a glance as he sighed, his voice laced with annoyance. One day, that sense of humor of yours is going to get you killed, Victor. Victor paused, but only for a beat, before scoffing. Hey, come on, what kind of joke is that? Don't start pulling death flags on me, man. I've got plenty of years left. His steps matched Adir's as they walked side by side. Anyway, Victor continued, his tone taking on a slightly more serious edge. I came looking for you for a reason. The game releases tonight. You didn't forget, did you? The first virtual reality game to emerge since World War. It had started as nothing more than a rumor, whispered across local internet forums and news reports a decade ago. At first, most dismissed it. Why would a world still recovering from an apocalypse waste resources on a game? But as time passed, the whispers grew louder. The turning point came a few years ago, when the 12 city managers confirmed the rumors and announced their direct involvement in the project. From that moment, the game wasn't just a rumor, it was a phenomenon that everyone was desperate to be part of. Yeah, I know, Adir said, his voice flat as he continued walking without breaking pace, his lack of enthusiasm palpable. Not interested. Victor froze for a moment, caught completely off guard. What the hell did you just say? He blurted out, rushing to keep up. The idea of playing without his best friend hadn't even crossed his mind. Especially not this game, something that was shaping up to be bigger than anything before it. Victor hesitated for a second, uncertainty flickering across his face. Then, as if making up his mind, he grabbed Adir's arm, stopping him in his tracks. His usual playful expression faded, replaced by something far more serious. There's something else you need to know, he said quietly, his voice dropping. He paused again, weighing his words before leaning in. My father told me. The game is using the latest genetic mutation research. Adir glanced at Victor with a spark of curiosity. Genetic mutation has been the hottest topic of the past century. It wasn't just a solution for most human ailments, from minor illnesses to terminal diseases like cancer. It also offered a means to vastly extend one's lifespan and unlock physical abilities, far surpassing the limits of ordinary humans. However, like all fateful gifts, it came with a catch. Only the wealthy, the influential, and their families had access to it. Either that, or elite military personnel, those handpicked and sworn to protect the city from external threats. Is this some kind of joke? Adir thought, his brow furrowing. They're just handing out something like this to the public. It's too good to be true. He was about to ask Victor if he was really saying all of this, if his father's words even held any weight, when the reason he had gotten close to Victor resurfaced in his mind. His father, Henry Bates, Minister of Defense of Shelter City 9, the most powerful man in the city, second only to the city manager himself, with complete control over the mutant army known as the Superhuman Task Force. Anything that came from this man's mouth wouldn't be some casual remark. So, I've got your attention now, right? Victor asked, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. He had just spilled information that wasn't meant to be shared, confident it would be enough to break through his friend's indifference. But to his surprise, the walls of indifference were thicker than he had anticipated. Still not playing, Adir replied. Victor stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief, like he'd just been personally offended. Okay, just tell me why, he said, his voice a mix of confusion and hurt. This game might have been his only shot at finally getting a genetic mutation. So whatever his reason was, it better be a damn good one. Adir sighed. Do you know how much the game helmet costs? Victor thought for a moment before answering. I don't know. 15,000, like every rich kid. He was clueless when it came to price tags. Adir let out a slow, tired breath at the response. Victor's complete lack of basic awareness never failed to unsettle him. It's 7,199 credits, he said flatly. Victor shrugged, completely unfazed. Oh, cheaper than I thought, he said. That same clueless grin still stuck on his face. Adir's thoughts turned cold for a moment. This guy might just end up being my first victim in this life. He forced a smile. It's not cheap. Not even close. Do you know what a low-class family earns in a month? Mine, for example. Before the idiot could throw out another clueless guess, Adir cut him off. His voice sharpened, each word landing with weight. My mom's the only one working. She makes 600 credits a month. That's actually considered decent where we come from. I get 100 from the university as a scholarship. That puts us at 700. He paused just long enough for it to sink in. Now imagine we don't spend a single credit. No food, no rent, No electricity, nothing. We'd still need to save for over 10 months just to afford one helmet. As Adir spoke, his eyes naturally tracked the subtle shifts in Victor's expression. First, a slight twitch beneath his eye, then, the tightening of his jaw as he began to grit his teeth, and finally, in a tone sharper than usual, Victor snapped, "You jerk." Without another word, he spun around and stormed off, his steps quick and heavy, each one louder than the last. Apparently, he was angry about something, but Adir didn't seem even slightly bothered. He completely ignored him and glanced down at his wristwatch, noticing the hour hand resting on 5 and the minute hand pointing to 1. "Huh, better not miss the bus," he muttered, then turned and continued walking quickly. It took him 5 minutes to leave the faculty building. As soon as Adir stepped outside, he felt the change. The warm, filtered air inside gave way to the harsh, unfiltered reality of the world beyond. Though it was summer, the air felt unnaturally cool, not refreshing, but dry and metallic, each breath leaving a faint sting in his throat. Overhead, thick yellowish clouds blanketed the sky, casting a sickly hue over the campus. They hung low and heavy, like a warning. Rain was coming, the kind that didn't just soak through your clothes, but irritated your skin and left behind a lingering chemical scent. He pulled out a cheap cloth mask and slipped it on, then adjusted a pair of worn plastic goggles over his eyes. The air wasn't deadly on contact, but staying in it too long left your throat burning and your skin itching in patches. You couldn't scratch. It took him about 20 minutes to reach the bus stop at the edge of campus. Just in time, a bit of relief slipped through. Due to the Resource Conservation Act, there were only 2 buses a day, the first in the morning, and this one. If he missed it, he'd be stuck walking the 3-hour route home, possibly under contaminated rain. Even for someone like Adir, that would have been an unpleasant idea. As he approached, he spotted a small group of students standing near the stop, their postures slouched with the weight of the day. He walked up without a word, quietly observing. Like him, they wore cheap cloth masks and basic goggles to shield their eyes. Unlike the wealthy students with gene-enhanced skin, the commons like them had to protect what little nature had given them. Their uniforms were faded, their colors washed out, and edges fraying, a silent but clear sign of where they came from. They were his kind, the poor, the unmodified. Each of them had earned their place at the only university in Shelter City 9 through raw talent and determination. Yet they remained the quiet 1% no one ever mentioned. Not long after, the bus quietly pulled up to the stop. Adir was the last to step inside. He took the first empty seat he found, not caring about comfort or space. In a world like this, just being able to ride a vehicle was already a luxury in itself. After a short ride, the bus turned onto a wide street lined with rows of 2-story buildings on each side. Though the houses were small and dull, painted in nothing but shades of gray, they were still considered one of the better residential areas in the city. Soon after, Adir got off the bus and walked up to the door of one of the houses. He glanced at his wristwatch, just a few minutes past 6, then pulled out his keys and unlocked the door. A wave of warm air mixed with the scent of cooked tomatoes greeted him. A familiar, cheerful voice followed right after. "Welcome back, brother." Adir looked up and saw a smiling head pop out from the kitchen doorway. "Hey, Neva. What's for dinner? Smells good." She was only a year younger than Adir, with short, shoulder-length hair as dark as night. Unlike her brother, her eyes were a striking light blue, creating a sharp contrast against her fair skin. "Tomato soup," she replied with a mischievous grin. Realizing the subtle frown that appeared on her brother's face, she added, "I know you don't like it, but it's the end of the month. It's the only thing we have left." She disappeared back into the kitchen, only to return a second later with a concerned look. "Did you get into a fight again?" she asked, eyes narrowing as they scanned his face. "No," Adir answered, slipping off his shoes. "I just slipped and fell." "Neva wasn't buying it, brother. That's the second time this week. If the bullies get too annoying, just tell them your sister's more than happy to kick their asses." She flexed her thin, bony arms in mock threat. To her, with no father figure around, her brother had always been the smartest and coolest person in the world. She couldn't imagine a scenario where he wasn't in control, so she brushed it off with a light-hearted joke. Adir chuckled. "Yeah, I told them that. You know what? They actually backed off." Then, a bit more seriously, he added, "Just don't tell Muriel." "All right, no need to make her worry." Neva giggled. "All right. Just leave your clothes in the bathroom. I'll get them washed before she gets back." "You're the best," Adir said with a thumbs up before heading upstairs, where his room and the bathroom were located. He changed out of his clothes, tossed his uniform into the laundry bag, and grabbed a wet tissue to wipe himself down. He glanced at his reflection, checking for any visible signs of the beating. Only a faint bruise had surfaced on his pale, sickly skin. Once he was finished, he checked the time, 6:28. Time to head downstairs. The table was already set for him: one bowl of tomato soup, a small piece of bread, and a few pickles on the side, just a single serving. It was clear that Neva had already eaten, and their mother hadn't returned from work yet. "Brother, clean up the table and handle the dishes after you eat, okay? I'm heading upstairs to do the laundry," Neva called out as she made her way up. "All right," Adir replied, easing himself into the chair. He stared at the bowl in front of him. The soup looked redder than usual, so vivid he could almost swear it was brighter than any other day. His empty stomach and the low grumbling from within were enough to push him into motion. He picked up the spoon and dipped it into the soup. That's when it started. "Not this crap again," he muttered, as a cold sweat crept across his forehead. Plop! His unfocused gaze flickered, landing onto round shapes rising in the soup side by side, unmoving. Too round, too familiar. Adir stared into the tomato soup and the soup stared back. Two round shapes floated on the surface, still and watching. Soon, everything began to shift. His vision tinted red, slowly bleeding over the room until everything matched the color of the soup. He felt it. He knew what was coming, the inevitable, but it was already too late. Then came the voice. "Son." Flat, cold, distant. It echoed not from the room, but from somewhere far closer. "Stop," Adir blurted out, his voice shaking, but the voice didn't stop. "Son." Instinctively, he shut his eyes tight. Darkness had always been his sanctuary, but even there, it found him. "Son, eat your meal. We wouldn't want your sister to go to waste, would we?" His eyes flew open, desperate to escape, but light only brought the vision with it. He saw the face. She was young, with long blonde hair. She stared at him with hollow, empty sockets where her eyes used to be. Tears, thick and red, streamed down her pale cheeks. Then her lips, almost colorless, parted. "Brother." And just like that, it was gone. The red faded. The dead face vanished. In its place was Neva, her expression tight with worry, her voice gentle. "Brother, are you okay?" Adir looked at her with unfocused eyes, trying to convince himself that he was truly back, that the childhood trauma had passed. He tried to speak, but his breathing was still too erratic. "Fine. I'm sorry," Neva said softly, her voice full of concern as she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug, offering what little comfort she could. "I didn't know the trauma was still there." Of course, the trauma she meant wasn't the real one from his dark past life, but the one he had carefully fabricated in this world. After being reincarnated, Adir was found as a baby outside the city walls and brought to the city orphanage. He lived there for 8 years before Moriel, who worked at the orphanage, adopted him into her home. And whenever someone asked about his odd behaviors, like why he couldn't stand soup, he always pointed to the orphanage and its awful kitchen staff. "It's okay, it's not your fault," Adir said quietly, letting his sister comfort him. "I'll make you something else. You don't have to eat this," Neva replied quickly, grabbing the bowl of soup and hurrying back into the kitchen. "It's been happening more often, and this time, I almost didn't come back," Adir thought, gently setting down the spoon he'd been gripping tightly. A faint smear of blood marked the handle and his fingers. That sharp sting, subtle but grounding, had snapped him back just in time. Pain, as always, was the only thing strong enough to anchor him to reality. He grabbed a napkin and wiped the blood away just as Neva returned with a plate in her hands. "We still had some canned salami, so I made you a sandwich. Is that okay?" Neva asked softly, concern lacing her voice. "It's perfect, thanks," he replied with a small, tired smile, raising the sandwich to take a bite only to be interrupted by a knock at the door. "Is that Muriel?" he asked, lowering the sandwich slightly. "I don't think it's Mom. She said she'd be working late," Neva said, already heading toward the hallway. "I'll get it. You go ahead and eat." Shortly after, Neva returned with a large box in her arms, a puzzled and surprised look on her face. "This came for you," she said, setting it on the table. The box wasn't particularly heavy, but it was definitely large. That wasn't what surprised her, though. In the city, all deliveries went through a single logistics agency, and their services weren't cheap. Whoever sent this had to have money to spare. "Do you know what it is? Who sent it?" she asked eagerly, inching closer, clearly hoping her brother would open it right away. Adir stood and calmly began unboxing the package, showing no hint of surprise, almost like he'd been expecting it all along. As he lifted the flaps, a small note sat neatly on top, waiting to be read. "You jerk." He exhaled softly through his nose, a sound caught between a sigh and a smirk. "It's from a friend," he said casually. Neva leaned in, eyes wide with curiosity. As he pulled back the last flap and revealed what was inside, she let out a sharp gasp. "Wait, is that a game helmet?" Like everyone else across all 12 cities, Neva had also heard the buzz about the upcoming VR MMO. But beyond all the excitement, what stuck with her most was how expensive the gear was, and this was no small gift. "I can't wait to pass the entrance exams and start making rich friends like you." Neva sighed dramatically. She also wanted to play the game, who didn't? But according to the online forums, once a game helmet was activated, it sensed to the user's brainwaves and couldn't be used by anyone else. So borrowing her brother's wasn't an option. As she mulled it over, turning the thought into fuel for her study motivation, a sudden knock at the door snapped her out of it. "Now, who could that be?" she mumbled, blinking away the daydream. She went to the door again and returned with another box, this one even bigger, balanced carefully in her arms. "Let me guess, another rich friend," she said with a raised eyebrow. "I guess," Adir replied, his tone uncertain. Unlike before, he hadn't been expecting this one. As he opened the box, the first thing that greeted him was a cake sealed inside a clear container. It was covered in a rich red glaze and decorated with what looked like fresh, glossy cherries. "Ah, is that a cake? Are those cherries sour cherries?" Neva squealed like a fangirl, her eyes lighting up. She looked even more excited than when she saw the game helmet earlier, and honestly, who could blame her? A cake with fresh fruit on top was the kind of luxury someone in her shoes might only taste once, maybe twice a year if she was lucky. She quickly lifted the cake out of the box, and beneath it sat another game helmet, along with a note. Unlike Victor's sloppy one, this note was written on eye-catching pink paper with a faint, sweet aroma clinging to it. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate, clearly someone had put effort into it. "A small gesture to show my gratitude. I hope you'll accept it." And at the bottom, like a signature, was the name, Selena White. Selena White. Neva forcefully tore her eyes away from the cake, squinting at the name on the note. "Why does that sound familiar?" she muttered, thinking out loud. A second later, recognition hit her. "Wait, what? No way, that's her." "You know her?" Adir asked, genuinely curious. Neva spun around, looking at him like he'd just asked if water was wet. "What do you mean, do I know her?" "Of course I do. Everyone my age knows who Selena White is." She began counting on her fingers, her voice buzzing with excitement. She was ranked #1 in Young Influentials Monthly, super famous for her charity work, especially with orphans, crazy smart. "And I mean, come on, have you seen her? She's absolutely gorgeous." Then her tone shifted, a bit more serious. "And her mom, chairwoman of the Angel Wing Foundation, also happens to own the orphanage where our mom works." She paused, a doubtful look crossing her face as she asked, "Brother, are you seriously dating our mom's boss's daughter?" "I'm just helping her with her piano lessons," Adir replied casually as he slowly lifted the game helmet out of the box. "Piano lessons? Since when do you know how to play piano?" Neva asked suspiciously, raising an eyebrow. But before she could press further, Adir cut in. "It's for you," he said, holding the helmet out toward her. For a moment, Neva stared at the sleek, gray device in his hands, its design almost like a motorcycle helmet, only without the visor. Adir watched her face shift through a dozen expressions, as if she were arguing with herself internally. Finally, she spoke. "I think you should send it back," she said softly. "It's way too expensive. I can't accept something like that." Then, after a short pause, she added, "And with the entrance exams just 2 months away, I don't want to get distracted by a game." "That's a smart call," Adir replied with a smile, placing the helmet back in the box. He reached for the cake next, intending to return it too, only to be stopped by her hand, firm and unyielding. "Leave the cake," Neva said, her voice steady and her expression uncharacteristically serious. It was clear the cake was staying. 6:50 p.m. After finishing his meal and cleaning up the dishes, Adir returned to his room. It was a small space, just enough for a single bed, a wardrobe, and a modest desk. On the desk sat a battered laptop gifted by his university, to half-melted candles, and the game helmet Selena had sent him, now carefully packed back into its box, waiting to be returned. For a teenage boy, the room was almost unnaturally simple, tidy, and clean. He sat on the edge of his bed, holding the other helmet, the one Victor had sent, and glanced at the time. 10 minutes until the power cut and the game launch, he muttered. In low-income districts like theirs, scheduled blackouts were common, a measure enforced by the city to conserve energy. Still, the fact that the launch of the most anticipated game in decades coincided with one of these outages felt off. He picked up the instruction manual resting next to him and flipped through it. There wasn't a single word about the game itself, just technical data and safety guidelines. Following the instructions, he powered up the device. A small digital display lit up near the base of the helmet, reading 100%. According to the manual, that meant the internal battery was fully charged, enough for approximately 3 hours of use. It meant that after 3 hours of gameplay, he'd have to wait until morning for the electricity to return, just to recharge the helmet if he wanted to keep playing. Such was one of the many inconveniences of being poor in a world still recovering from an apocalypse. Adir lit the candles first, then placed the game helmet on his head and waited. Everything was pitch black, except for a green neon countdown pulsing at the center of his view. He waited quietly as the numbers ticked down. 3, 2, 1. The moment the countdown hit 0, a sudden pull gripped his entire being. Everything went dark, and for a few seconds all sensation vanished. It wasn't just a visual blackout, he could feel his entire body being transported somewhere else, as if space itself had shifted around him. For a split second, he thought about removing the helmet and checking what was going on. But just then, his vision and senses came rushing back. This, Adir murmured in disbelief. His body was suspended high in the sky, still clad in the familiar pajamas he always wore to sleep, soaring weightlessly as he looked down at the vast, breathtaking world stretching out beneath him. And it wasn't just the visuals that felt real, it was everything. He could feel the gentle and cold breeze brushing against his skin, the unfamiliar scent of clean, untouched air filling his lungs. It was too real. While he was still taking in the moment, watching, feeling, savoring every bit of the surreal scene, glowing green text suddenly appeared before him. Choose your path. Moments later, more text shimmered into existence, like fireflies drawn toward a distant sun. Astra, one of the 4 main paths, created by the god Astrael. He shaped the first solid form from the chaos, giving structure to the formless. It represents everything physical. Ether, one of the 4 main paths, created by the goddess Aetheris. She gave inner depth to all that exists, shaping the unseen essence within the scene. It represents everything spiritual. Ignis, one of the 4 main paths, created by the god Ignivar. He sparked the first motion within creation, awakening both flesh and soul. It represents every movement. Nether, one of the 4 main paths, created by the goddess Nethera. As the counterforce to creation, she began the cycle of decay, undoing form so that renewal may begin. It represents every destruction and rebirth. Oh, this is interesting, Adir said, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. In his previous life, gaming had been one of his many hobbies, particularly MMORPGs, and he quite enjoyed them. Based on his experience, he had expected to choose something like a class, but seeing this, it genuinely surprised him. For the first time in his life or any life, someone, or something, was asking him to choose his own path, and so, he decided to take his time, floating there in the sky, carefully pondering which path truly suited him and which one he genuinely wanted. As Adir hovered in silent contemplation, something unexpected began to unfold. First came a darkness, rising from nowhere, staining the sky and veiling the world beneath his feet. Then came the sound, a low, buzzing hum that filled his ears and the space around him, like the distant clash of 1,000 instruments colliding into one alien note. Next was the cracking. He looked up and saw the sky itself fracture, a jagged tear splitting open with a bone-deep creak. Almost instinctively, Adir thought of fleeing, but he quickly remembered he had no control here. He was merely floating, his body bound by an unseen force. Frozen in anticipation, he watched. From the widening rift, dozens of brilliant lights surged outward, flooding the world and sky once again with a blinding, ethereal glow. As they approached, he could see them clearly, letters radiant, sharp, and pulsing with a presence too vast to comprehend. The letters drifted downward and arranged themselves above the existing 4 pots, taking their place at the very top, while the 4 original pots remained beneath, glowing grandly in green. This new one was different. It was made entirely of colorless light, shining not with beauty, but with something beyond magnificence, something absolute. Primora, the one. They longed to exist, and I let them be. And thus, the fifth path descended upon the world. Is this some kind of glitch, or part of an opening event? Adir murmured, thoughtfully sifting through the dazzling events unfolding before him, leaning more toward the latter. Whatever, he chuckled, having already decided which path to choose. He had wanted to choose his own path freely, without any manipulation or outside influence. But this newly revealed path felt far too special. Ignoring it would have been nothing short of foolish, and so, without hesitating any further, he gave his answer. I choose Primora. The moment he spoke, all the existing texts vanished, replaced by new ones flashing before his eyes. Analyzing character. Character analysis complete. Generating status panel. Status panel created. Name Adir. Race human. Path Primora. Evolution step O. Physique 2. Will 3. Resilience 3. Sense 2. Energy 10 above 10. Registered talents 0 above 5. Sparks, complete your first evolution to unlock. Sanctuary, complete your first evolution to unlock. Free stat points 0. Adir skimmed through the newly opened status panel, his mind swirling with thoughts, especially how the system knew his name. But before he could delve deeper into it, a sudden force yanked at him. Gravity absent until now returned with brutal immediacy. Without warning, Adir began to plummet, falling from what must have been thousands of meters above the ground. As he accelerated, the pressure of the air slammed against his body, growing harsher with every passing second. The soft breeze he had barely noticed earlier had transformed into a violent gale, clawing at his skin and tearing at his clothes. The freezing cold of high altitude bit into him, seeping deep into his flesh, numbing his hands and face. Breathing became a struggle as the rushing air battered his lungs, and his eyes stung from the relentless wind tearing at them. Fuck, he cursed under his breath, feeling every painful detail of the fall. The brutal realism of the experience made one chilling thought creep into his mind. If the senses were this real, would dying feel real too? He had died once before. He knew exactly what it felt like, and it was nothing even remotely close to pleasure. Still, stubbornly, he kept his eyes open. He watched as the ground grew larger and larger in his vision, rushing up to meet him. Despite everything, the pain, the tension, the chaos, he couldn't help but enjoy it. There was something raw, something breathtakingly beautiful about the fall. And then came the inevitable, the crash. Blood. Adir blinked in confusion. It wasn't the bone-shattering, flesh-bursting impact he had braced for. Instead, it felt like a mild stumble, no more than tripping and falling onto solid ground. Slowly, he pushed himself up, first checking his body. Finding no visible wounds or signs of injury, he finally turned his attention to his surroundings. He quickly realized it was no longer the bright daytime sky he had fallen through. Darkness cloaked the area, and it didn't take him long to notice the jagged stone walls encircling him. He was inside a cave. How did I fall here? He thought, frowning as he looked up only to find solid rock overhead. No hole, no entrance, no explanation for his arrival. Then something else struck his senses. The smell, a foul mixture of rot, ash, and dampness clung to the air, thick and oppressive. He glanced down and noticed the ground was coated in a thin layer of black soil. Faint footprints were scattered across the black soil, so sharp and brittle they could only have been left by bare bone, like the steps of skeletons wandering through the darkness. What is this? A skeleton dungeon? Adir muttered to himself, drawing on his experience with MMORPGs to make an educated guess. At that moment, the green text returned to his vision, carrying a new message. Talent recognition. Observer LV1 confirmed. Talent has been identified based on demonstrated behavior. Proceed with registration to the status panel. Cost, 1 energy. Reward, 1 free stat point. Adir read the system message carefully, running it through his mind before finally saying, yes. Immediately, he felt something invisible within him being siphoned away. The sensation was strange but brief, and once it faded, he found himself wondering how he could view the changes to his status panel. As if responding to his thoughts, green text appeared in front of him, revealing the updated panel. Name Adir. Race human. Path Primora. Evolution step O. Physique 2. Will 3. Resilience 3. Sense 2. Energy 9 above 10. Registered talents 1 above 5. Sparks, complete your first evolution to unlock. Sanctuary, complete your first evolution to unlock. Free stat points 1. He noticed that his energy had decreased by 1 point, while both the registered talents and free stat points sections had each increased by 1. So this is how it works, Adir muttered, a trace of understanding flashing in his eyes. Rather than granting him a new skill or ability, the system had simply recognized a talent he already possessed and rewarded him with a free stat point for demonstrating it. It was obvious that the game's power system revolved around the player's genuine talents. Before allocating his newly gained free stat point, Adir noticed the LV1 indicator next to the talent and paused, a thought crossing his mind. He crouched beside one of the skeletal footprints and began examining it more closely. The strange blue crystals embedded in the stone walls cast a faint, natural glow, like a pale moonlight, and he used that dim illumination to aid his inspection. Short, no taller than a child. Toes turned slightly inward, walks hunched over. Pressures heavier on the right, carrying something sword or short spear. Weight, 15, maybe 20 kilos, light on its feet, but the bones are solid. Not something that'll crumble with a single blow. As a former human hunter, his tracking and observation skills were exceptional, and after completing his deeper investigation, the system message appeared once again, confirming what he had already suspected. Talent recognition. Observer LV2 confirmed. Talent has been identified based on further demonstrated behavior. Proceed with registration to the status panel. Cost, 10 energy. Reward, 10 free stat points. Unlike before, the reward wasn't just a single stat point, it was an incredible tenfold increase. But there was a small problem. I don't have enough energy to register it, Adir muttered, glancing at his energy bar and wondering how he could increase it. He experimented a little, but quickly realized he couldn't allocate his free stat point directly into energy at the same time. He wasn't keen on spending it on his other stats either, not before he fully understood what each of them truly represented. For now, he chose to set the issue aside and focus on exploring the cave around him. With less than 3 hours of battery life remaining on the helmet, he had no intention of wasting it all on tedious system analysis. He shifted his attention to a tunnel, the only path leading deeper into the cave, and began moving forward in small, cautious steps. A faint excitement stirred within him at the thought of meeting his first skeleton victim. Adir continued progressing through the narrow corridor, guided by the dim glow of the crystals embedded in the walls, while carefully following the trail of footprints. The deeper he went, the more numerous the prints became, and among them, a few were fresh, clear signs that he would soon encounter a skeleton. And soon enough, he did. At the end of the corridor, he spotted a faint shadow cast against the wall. Something was waiting just around the corner to the left. Adir didn't know what sense a skeleton has and how powerful one can be, so he decided to be cautious. He slowed his steps, softening his movements as much as possible to suppress any sound, creeping forward with silent precision. When he finally reached the end of the corridor, he saw the prey he had been tracking all this time, now in plain sight for the first time. Compared to Adir's height of 170 meters, it appeared significantly shorter, no more than 140 meters tall. Its skeletal structure differed slightly from that of a normal human. The skull was unusually round, the neck bone was short, causing the head to lean forward, and both the arms and legs were proportionally longer than usual. In its right hand, it held a broken, half-length spear. Despite the bones appearing faded and moldy in color, their structure looked surprisingly solid and durable. I might need a weapon, Adir thought. If it were a proper living enemy, he could find a weakness, strike from behind, or choke them into unconsciousness. But this opponent was nothing but bones, and the only way to defeat it was to shatter them. Unfortunately, the only equipment he had was his pajamas, no shoes on his feet, and not a weapon in sight, not even a large stone he could use as a blunt instrument. No, there's a weapon I can use, Adir thought with a faint smile, already plotting his first kill in this game world. Moving as silently as he could, he crept closer to the skeleton, like a spider stalking its prey. He closed the distance inch by inch. When he finally reached striking range and confirmed the skeleton still hadn't noticed him, he lunged forward, grabbing it from behind by the ribs and yanking backward with all his strength. Caught off guard, the skeleton couldn't resist the sudden force. It stumbled, lost its balance, and crashed onto its back with a hollow clatter. Without hesitation, Adir pressed his foot down hard onto the skeleton's rib cage, pinning it in place. As he did, he quickly snatched up the broken spear that had fallen from its hand. The spear's tip was old, rusted, and worn, much like the skeleton itself, but beneath the decay, the metallic core still held firm, solid enough to break bone if used properly. Without wasting a moment, Adir raised the spear and drove the sharpened tip straight down toward the struggling skeleton's skull. The weapon struck, but fell short of his expectations. His raw strength wasn't enough, and the spear only left a visible crack across the bone. Still, the force of the blow stunned the skeleton, leaving it dazed and motionless for half a second, long enough for a second strike. Crack! This time, the spear smashed through. The satisfying sound of splitting bone echoed through the air, quickly followed by a series of system messages. Talent recognition. Tracking LV1 confirmed. Talent has been identified based on following and interpreting environmental traces. Talent recognition. Stealth LV1 confirmed. Talent has been identified based on silent movement and successful ambush. Talent recognition. Tactics LV1 confirmed. Talent has been identified based on strategic engagement and enemy control. Proceed with registration to the status panel. Cost, 1 energy per talent. Reward, 1 free stat point per talent. Adir first made sure the skeleton was truly dead, broken beyond recovery, before turning his attention to the new system messages. No loot or experience points, he muttered, disappointment clear in his voice. He chose not to register tactics, knowing he was limited to only 5 talents. Since he understood how talent progression worked, he preferred to register only the ones he could advance the easiest later on. So he spent 2 energy to register stealth and tracking, feeling the same sensation of siphoning some unknown energy within him. At the same time, he earned 2 additional free stat points. After a bit more thought, he decided to spend 1 free stat point to increase his physique. Just moments ago, he had failed to crack the skeleton's skull with a single blow, clearly due to a lack of strength. Besides, it wasn't hard to guess what physique represented, so he decided to upgrade it and personally experience the effects. The moment he increased the stat, a sudden warmth surged through his body. His muscles, tendons, and even his internal organs twitched and spasmed in response. It wasn't painful, just unsettling, but the discomfort faded quickly, replaced by something else. A rush of strength. It felt almost unreal. He could sense every fiber of his body tightening, solidifying, filling with a new, unfamiliar power. Feels good, too good, he muttered under his breath, savoring the strange, addictive rush. Physique, 2 up to 3. Will, 3. Resilience, 3. Sense, 2. Energy, 7 above 10 up to 7 above 11. Registered talents, 3 above 5. Sparks, complete your first evolution to unlock. Sanctuary, complete your first evolution to unlock. Free stat points, 2. Adir summoned his status panel to review the changes and immediately noticed something. When his physique increased by 1, his maximum energy had risen by exactly the same amount. He had suspected it before, but now he was nearly certain. Energy wasn't a separate stat of its own, it was the sum of all his other attributes combined. He glanced back at the motionless skeleton, slowly reaching out to touch its rough, worn bones. There was no blood to spill, no flesh to tear, no eyes to dim, just a pile of bones. It was almost hard to believe this thing had been moving around just moments ago. Yet, a strange clarity lingered in Adir's dark brown eyes. He had to admit he kind of enjoyed it. But still, no loot, he sighed, staring at his only prize, a broken spear. Not satisfied with just that, he decided to search the remains more thoroughly. And sure enough, tucked deep inside the skull, he found something. A small purple crystal, faintly glowing, embedded directly into the bone. It was almost fused into the skull. Using the sharp tip of the broken spear, Adir carefully pried it free. The crystal was tiny, even smaller than the tip of his little finger, and didn't look particularly valuable. Yet something about it was strange. As he stared at it, a strange hunger stirred within him. For a fleeting moment, the crystal looked almost delicious, irresistible in a way he couldn't explain. Finding the sensation both bizarre and intriguing, he hesitated for only a second before raising the crystal to his mouth, curious to taste it. It had no flavor, but the instant his tongue touched it, the hunger intensified. His stomach even let out a faint growl. Okay, what's the worst that could happen? It's just a game, right? Adir reasoned, shrugging to himself. Without wasting another thought, he tossed the crystal into his mouth. He tried to chew it first, but it was far too hard, and before he could resist, an instinctive swallowing reflex kicked in, sending the crystal sliding down into his stomach. For a moment, he simply waited, curious about what might happen. Then it hit. Suddenly, he felt a surge of energy flooding into his body. The sensation was strangely familiar, except this time, it was the opposite of what he had experienced when registering talents. Back then, Energy had been pulled out of him. Now, it was pouring in, filling him instead of draining away. Before he could fully process the sensation, a familiar green system message appeared before him. You have consumed an energy crystal LV1. Your energy has increased by 0.1. Energy, 7 above 11 up to 71 above 11. Just like that, Adir had discovered a way to replenish his energy. The game had already exceeded Adir's expectations. The technology behind it was beyond anything he had ever seen. Everything felt so real. Every sensation almost indistinguishable from reality itself. But what entertained him the most was the feeling of discovery, like a child rediscovering the world for the first time. Collect the purple crystals. They're important, he noted, mentally pinning a new reminder in the task room of his memory palace. With that, he continued forward through the dim corridors of the cave. It wasn't long before he encountered another skeleton along the path. This time, knowing the skeleton's senses were dull and its movements slow, Adir didn't bother sneaking. Instead, he sprinted straight at it, spear in hand. The skeleton noticed him, but before it could even lift its broken, rusted sword, Adir's spear drove straight through its skull, shattering it and dropping the creature in an instant. The increase in his physique stat was immediately evident. No system message appeared this time, apparently. The system hadn't detected anything worthy of talent recognition, but Adir didn't particularly care. If he needed to, he still had plenty of talents he hadn't yet revealed to the system. Just as he had with the previous skeleton, he began searching the remains. The broken sword was in even worse condition than his spear, so he ignored it, finding nothing else of use. He quickly searched for the purple crystal and found it embedded once again inside the skull. You have consumed an energy crystal LV1. Your energy has increased by 0.1. Energy, 71 above 11 up to 72 above 11. After experiencing the same strange rush of energy, Adir checked his status panel. At this pace, he calculated, he would need to hunt down another 28 skeletons to gather enough energy to register a level to talent. But the cave was vast, and the battery of his game helmet was steadily draining. He also didn't want to rush blindly. There could easily be stronger creatures lurking deeper inside, or even hidden traps waiting for the careless. Caution and preparation had always been part of his philosophy. Maintaining a steady pace, Adir wandered through the rotting corridors for what he estimated to be nearly 2 hours. Relying on his senses, he moved carefully, eliminating every skeleton he encountered as quickly and efficiently as possible. He wasn't sure whether to call it luck or misfortune, but throughout that time, he hadn't encountered a single trap, a stronger enemy, or even a different type of creature. It was just the same goblin-like skeletons over and over again. By the time the repetition began to numb his mind, killing the already dead on repeat, he finally stopped to check his energy. Energy, 99 above 11. In total, he had killed 27 more skeletons, and now, he was just 1 kill away from reaching the 10 energy he needed to register his next advancement. While searching for his next prey, Adir stepped into a wider corridor. This passage was different from the rough stone corridors he had seen so far. It was clear that an intelligent hand had shaped this place. On both sides of the hallway, rows of small rooms stretched into the distance, each one sealed off by iron bars. It didn't take long for Adir to realize he had entered a prison block. He moved forward carefully, curiosity and caution guiding his steps as he glanced into each cell one by one. Most were empty, aside from layers of filth and thick spiderwebs. Some cell doors were still locked, while others hung open. Just as Adir was about to conclude that this was nothing more than an abandoned, forgotten underground prison, he spotted something. In one of the locked cells, lying curled up in the middle of the filthy floor, was a small figure. It was a young girl, small and frail, dressed in what must have once been a beautiful white outfit, now torn, dirtied, and stained. Her long, tangled blonde hair was spread across the dusty ground, her back turned toward him, her knees drawn up against her chest in a protective, fetal position. He observed carefully and noticed the faint rise and fall of her shoulders. She was breathing. Alive. A prisoner, Adir thought. But the idea didn't sit right with him. This place didn't look like somewhere where prisoners would be kept. It was old, abandoned, and filled with nothing but mindless skeletons, creatures barely capable of basic movement, let alone organized captivity. Given that, Adir decided not to rush. Instead of making any noise that might alert the girl or anything else nearby, he chose to stay silent and study the scene further, determined to gather as much information as possible before acting. Fresh footprints, coming from the opposite side of the corridor. Small, light, hers. Rushed, panicked, running from something or someone. The steps are uneven, pauses here and there, not tactical, just collapsing from exhaustion. Her legs give out more than once, she falls, but every time, she forces herself back up. Final steps, staggering, barely holding together. She stumbles into the cell, pulls the door shut, a move born of pure desperation. No strategy, no plan, just survival instinct. Adir stopped in front of the closed cell door, hand resting lightly on the rusted bars. The door didn't just shut, it locked or rust welded itself shut. Trapped. 2 days, maybe 3, no food, no way out. Waiting, fading. Hey, Adir called out softly, watching the slight tremble in the girl's shoulders as she reacted to his voice. Slowly, she stirred, struggling to push herself upright. She turned her head toward him, her wide eyes filled with fear, confusion, and something else, hope. But she wasn't the only one surprised. The moment Adir got a clear look at her face, he felt a flicker of shock himself. She wasn't a little girl, not like he had assumed. Her features were more refined, resembling those of a young woman, probably somewhere in her 20s, and she wasn't entirely human either. Her ears were slightly elongated and tapered to a point. Her nose was small and delicate, and her large, ice blue eyes gave her the look of a porcelain doll, fragile, otherworldly. She opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again, like she had forgotten how to form the words. Adir didn't interrupt. He simply waited, patient and still. Her lips quivered. She tried once more. You, she finally whispered, her voice fragile and uncertain. You look tall. Another jolt of shock ran through Adir, but it wasn't because of how sweet her voice sounded, or how absurd her choice of words was. It was the language she spoke, a language that, as far as Adir knew, had never existed in the history of the world he had been reincarnated into. How can she speak Latin? Adir felt the conflict stir within him. In the 12 cities, only a single language was spoken, and it wasn't anything remotely close to Latin. Also, throughout all the history classes he had attended at the university, he had never once encountered a language that even remotely resembled those from his old world. Sure, countless tongues were spoken across this world, endless dialects and accents, but every single one was utterly alien to him, none bearing even the faintest trace of the languages he once knew. Also, it couldn't just be a coincidence, could it? They had wanted to create a new language for the game, and somehow ended up creating Latin. It was simply not believable. While Adir's thoughts surged, the girl seemed to realize that her choice of words had sounded absurd, and she quickly spoke again. Sorry, she said, hoping to clear up any misunderstanding. After a brief pause, she added, Can I ask, who are you? As Adir heard more of her speech, his certainty grew. She was speaking Latin. I'm Adir, just a player. He replied in Latin as well. He was fluent in Latin. It was one of the many languages he had picked up in his previous world. Due to his former profession, he had moved through countless countries, adopting new identities as easily as changing clothes. One of those identities, requiring him to blend into a very specific environment, had forced him to learn Latin. Talent recognition. Linguistic LV1 confirmed. Talent has been identified based on fluent adaptation to foreign speech. Proceed with registration to the status panel. Cost, 1 energy. Reward, 1 free stat point. Adir saw the system message acknowledging the talent, but he chose to ignore it for now, intending to reserve his energy to upgrade Observer to level 2 later. Player, the girl asked, tilting her head in confusion. There was also a hint of worry on her face, as she wasn't sure whether this so-called player was a friend or a foe. Whatever the word even meant to her, it was exactly the reaction Adir had anticipated. He had only said it out of curiosity to see how an NPC might respond if he identified himself as a player. Choosing to ignore both her confusion and her question, he crouched down to bring himself to her eye level, making his posture less intimidating. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he casually threw out his own question instead. What's your name? He asked, keeping his tone light, just enough to ease her tension and nudge the conversation forward. The girl stared at his face for a full second, then forced herself to sit up straighter. She shifted onto her knees, adjusting her posture to appear less haggard and shameful before finally speaking. It's Vesha, she said, pausing briefly before continuing, her voice steadier than before. Vesha Draven, citizen of the Valari Kingdom, youngest daughter of Lord Orvan Draven, follower of Astra, and believer in the god Astraeus. Adir raised an eyebrow, faintly amused. She had offered far more information than he asked for, not out of innocence, but careful calculation. She understood her situation well, a lone, vulnerable figure trapped in a crumbling prison. By revealing her identity and status, she wasn't just answering, she was positioning herself, trying to appear valuable rather than expendable. Quite the subtle thought, especially for an artificial intelligence. And without waiting long, she openly stated her true purpose. Can you help me escape? My father will make sure you are properly rewarded for it. It's locked, Adir said, pointing at the prison door with a slight glance. You're tall, the girl added quickly, then clarified. You're even taller than the royal guards of the kingdom. You must be strong. Hearing her reasoning, Adir chuckled quietly. He had just uncovered another piece of useful information. It was now obvious that Vesha wasn't human, at least, not fully. Her race's average height was likely shorter than humans, and she had mistakenly assumed he was one of her own. Why are you here? Adir asked, once again ignoring her question and plea. A brief flash of disappointment crossed her eyes, but she quickly masked it and said, I wanted to find the spark. Spark? He quickly glanced at his status panel and saw a section labeled Sparks. Not wanting to expose his lack of knowledge or seem even stranger than he already did, he decided against asking directly. And were you able to find it? He asked instead. Vesha hesitated, wondering for a moment if he was mocking her, but answered politely nonetheless. The 6 guards who accompanied me died while helping me escape a skeleton ambush. I didn't even get the chance to see the spark. As she spoke, her eyes grew red and wet, guilt clouding her expression. But she was a strong woman, or at least she believed herself to be, and she held the tears back, refusing to let them fall. I see, Adir said, pretending to share her grief while carefully choosing his next words. But before he could ask another question to gather more information, a sound echoed from the end of the corridor. They're here, Vesha blurted out, panic flashing in her eyes. The monsters responsible for her ruined state had finally found her. Frozen in fear and panic, her eyes drifted to the tall man, her only hope for survival. She watched him slowly rise to his full height, once again mesmerized by how tall he was. But then, she noticed something she had overlooked until now. The man was wearing strange, unfashionable clothes made of thin fabric, clearly not designed for defense. To make matters worse, he was barefoot and armed with nothing but a broken, rusty spear. I'm going to die here. The grim reality struck her like a truck. Even if he somehow manages to open the prison door and free her, then what? They were still trapped inside the dungeon. Sure, he was tall, maybe strong enough to take down 1 or 2 skeletons, but there were many lurking in these halls. The fragile hope that had briefly taken root inside her quickly crumbled. As she watched him calmly walk toward the oncoming skeleton, she waited tensely, listening as the sharp clash of weapons and the cracking of bone echoed down the corridor. And then silence. Relief washed over her. At least it had only been 1 skeleton, and the man had dealt with it easily enough. But that changed nothing. 1 dead skeleton wouldn't stop what was coming. More would arrive sooner or later. As she sat there, letting despair creep back in, she heard his footsteps approaching and then his voice. Stay back. She lifted her head, puzzled, and saw him toss a small purple crystal into his mouth. Well, what are you doing? She gasped in shock, staring at him as if he had lost his mind. Adir noticed her sudden outburst, silently noting that she seemed familiar with energy crystals, but chose to ignore it for now. He simply repeated, back. This time, it didn't sound like a request, it was an order, one delivered with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. Instinctively, Vesha drew on a scrap of strength she hadn't realized she still possessed. She pushed herself back, pressing against the wall and putting as much distance as she could between herself and the cell's iron bars. Meanwhile, Adir was busy with his character panel. He checked the previous logs and found the Observer LV to talent registration. Talent recognition. Observer LV to confirmed. Talent has been identified based on further demonstrated behavior. Proceed with registration to the status panel. Cost, 10 energy. Reward, 10 free stat points. He confirmed it internally and immediately felt the familiar draining sensation as his energy was consumed. Now, with 12 free stat points at his disposal, he allocated 7 of them to his physique stat. This should be enough to break the cell door now, he thought, feeling a surge of raw power coursing through every fiber of his body. Adir. Vesha repeated the name in her mind several times, as if trying to remember something. At first, she had assumed he was just another adventurer, someone who had come to the cave seeking quick fortune. one of those who would do anything for the right amount of cash. She knew that, by nature, adventurers were cunning and skilled, and she had hoped that maybe, just maybe, he would find a way to open the cell gate. Maybe he even knew a safe route out of the cave. Those were her only hopes in this desperate situation. No more, no less. Until she saw the purple crystal. She watched him swallow it casually, as if it were nothing more than candy. And what shocked her most, he remained completely fine afterward. Someone is consuming an energy crystal and surviving without so much as a twitch. Vesha could think of only one possibility. He is a practitioner. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. Her heartbeat quickened, her head swam, and for a moment her vision darkened, everything blurring except for one vivid figure, moving in front of her. Adir, standing in front of the cell door with an expressionless face. He stood there, still and silent, waiting, calculating. Then, with a speed Vesha's eyes couldn't even follow, he kicked the door. Bang! The sound exploded through the cell, loud, brutal, enough to send dust billowing into the air. The entire room trembled, and chunks of ancient stone crumbled from the walls. Startled, Vesha squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them again, the door was still standing, but she could see the difference. The frame around the lock was dented inward, almost crushed. Bang! A second kick, even more powerful than the first. Rust and dust rained down, forcing Vesha to cover her face, her heart hammering in her chest. Bang! Came the third impact, and then a heavier sound. A groaning metallic screech as the door finally gave way and crashed inward. Vesha's small body, still curled against the corner of the wall, trembled, but this time not from fear. It was excitement. It wasn't just the thrill of believing she might finally escape this dungeon with him by her side. It was the shock of realizing she was in front of one of those legendary figures, someone she had only glimpsed a handful of times in her life, even with her status, and otherwise knew only through the stories written in books. She slowly pulled her hands away from her eyes, forcing them open to finally see the heroic figure standing before her. But instead of the sight she had imagined, reality struck her with the exact opposite. Adir was lying face down in front of the prison gate, completely motionless. "Are you okay?" Vesha called out, her voice unsteady as she dragged herself toward him. But he remained still, offering no response. As panic tightened its grip on her, she heard a new sound rising from the far end of the corridor, the rattling of bones drawing closer. The skeletons had heard the commotion and were now rushing to the scene. In his dark, candle-lit room, Adir slowly sat up on the bed and pulled off the game helmet. The helmet's charge indicator blinked a faint red at 0%. He had managed to break open the cell door at the very last second. "I wonder if she'll survive," Adir thought. He wasn't exactly optimistic, after all. With all the noise he had made, the skeletons would no doubt rush to the scene. And with what little strength Vesha had left in her frail body, her chances of surviving were painfully slim. Still, he had acted out of selfish curiosity. He wanted to see what kind of choice an NPC and artificial intelligence would make in a situation like that. He was trying to understand the decision-making mechanism behind it, something that could be useful for his future interactions. But there was one critical thing he had overlooked: his own body, lying there, exposed and defenseless. Unaware of the danger, Adir got to his feet and glanced at his watch. 7:01 p.m. He found the charging cable and plugged it into the helmet, letting it sit in silence, waiting for the power to come back. As Adir found nothing better to do, he decided to begin his daily muscle training. But just as he was about to start, a knock came at the door. Assuming it was his sister, he walked over and grabbed the doorknob to open it. But strangely, with a loud crack, the knob snapped off and stayed in his hand. "What the hell?" Adir muttered, staring in disbelief at the iron handle that had snapped clean off the old door. "Brother, what was that?" Neva asked, stepping inside with a curious and confused look after hearing the noise. "Just the doorknob," Adir replied quickly, masking his surprise. "It was old and loose, just came off when I pulled it," he added. "Oh, okay," Neva said, then continued, "I came to borrow your laptop. It's fully charged, right?" Adir nodded and pointed. "On the table. If you're free, come downstairs and help me study. Also, Mom's back," she added as she walked out. Adir only nodded again and closed the door behind her, still staring at the broken handle in his hand. It wasn't loose, like he claimed. Sure, it was old, but not so fragile that it should have broken under normal pressure. "Don't tell me," the absurd thought hit him, and he quickly tossed the knob onto the table and dropped to the floor to begin his workout. He skipped his usual stretches and warm-ups and dove straight into the heavy sets. He lowered himself into a push-up position. Adir had been consistently training with bodyweight exercises since the age of 6, and on a typical day, he could easily knock out around 100 push-ups in a single set. But today was different. As he began, he immediately noticed how much easier it felt compared to before. By the time he hit 100, there was no sign of fatigue in his muscles. He shifted position and continued with one-arm push-ups. Another 100, still no real effort, only a faint warmth in his muscles. Surprised and curious, Adir tripled his usual workout. He followed push-ups with intense core training like crunches, lower body work like squats, and back and balance drills like reverse planks. By the time he completed his entire workout schedule, he wasn't even sweating, not a drop. If he had to guess, his body was now at least 6 times stronger than before. That only confirmed the absurd thought that had crept into his mind earlier. My body really got stronger. Victor was right, Adir whispered to himself. The only explanation for such a sudden, miraculous increase in strength was a genetic mutation, and the only thing that could have triggered that was the game. But what he couldn't wrap his head around was how. He had previously assumed that the most he could gain from the game was information knowledge on how to formulate a serum for genetic mutation. He hadn't even considered the possibility that a game helmet designed solely to access brain frequencies could affect something as physical and deeply rooted as his genes. Normally, genetic mutation requires direct intervention, like an injection, and as far as he knew, brainwave manipulation alone couldn't alter DNA. A new absurd thought began to take root in his mind. The game wasn't just a technological marvel, it was starting to feel like something out of a fantasy, the work of a mad genius. Adir stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and the first thing he noticed was the absence of the scar on his lip. A fresh bruise from the punch had completely healed in just 3 hours. His pale skin looked different, too. It now had a healthy sheen, smooth and clear, like someone who followed a strict skincare routine every day. Curious, he flexed in front of the mirror, lit only by a single candle. His body had always looked fit, but in a lean, weary sort of way. Now, his muscles appeared noticeably fuller. His abs and obliques, in particular, had taken on a sharper, more defined shape as if sculpted from marble. He had achieved more physical improvement in just 3 hours than most people could hope to gain in a lifetime. It was the kind of transformation only the rich and well-connected could normally afford. For a moment, he considered using the second game helmet, the one Selena had sent, and diving back in for another 3 hours. But he knew the system's limitations. Only one active connection per player, and no way to create a second avatar. With nothing else to do but wait for the power to return, he headed downstairs. "Son, how was your day?" Marielle greeted him from the couch as he came down the stairs. Too tired to stand, she simply waved her hand lazily in his direction. Her black hair and sharp blue eyes were proof enough no DNA test was needed to confirm. She was Niva's biological mother, exceptionally fruitful. Adir replied with a slight smile as he found his way to the dining table. Cluttered with textbooks and dimly lit by candlelight, he sat down beside Niva. "Is that so? I heard you received an expensive gift today. Was it from Victor?" Marielle's voice echoed again, weary, but laced with playful sarcasm. She knew about her son's close friendship with Victor, and of course, she knew exactly who Victor Bates was. Adir glanced at Niva, who gave a subtle shrug without looking up. He chuckled. "Yeah, a game helmet for the new release. Want to try it? I've got a spare." "The spare one is from Selena White, in case you're curious," Niva added flatly, her eyes still glued to her textbook. "Selena White." Marielle paused for a moment. Then, with a smirk, she gave him a thumbs up and said, "I'm proud of you, boy. Making friends with powerful people is the best kind of security for your future." She knew that better than most. Having graduated from the same university herself, she understood all too well that for people like them, a degree alone didn't mean much. Her current job existed because of the connections she had built back then, and it was influence, not education, that truly opened doors. "Also, I'm too busy and too old to play games," she added, closing her tired eyes. "Okay," Adir replied casually, without pressing the subject. He chose not to mention that it wasn't just a game, but potentially a device capable of triggering genetic mutation. Not because of the promise he'd made to Victor, but because he still didn't fully understand the mystery surrounding it. The game was cloaked in unanswered questions, and he wasn't entirely convinced there was no malicious intent behind it. He had no intention of letting the people he cared about play something so suspicious. "Muriel, have you ever heard of a language called Latin?" he asked, hoping to shed some light on the biggest question still haunting his mind. "Latin? No, I've never heard of it. Is it one of those old languages or something?" she replied, eyes still closed. From his sister's expression, or lack of one, it was clear she was just as clueless. "I guess so," Adir muttered. He briefly considered asking one of his history professors tomorrow, when suddenly, the landline phone on the wall began to ring. For a moment, everyone froze. Marielle's eyes snapped open wide with concern. Worry and fear were written clearly across her face. During blackouts like this, landlines usually went dead. If the phone were ringing now, there could only be one reason: an emergency line. "The children," Marielle gasped, suddenly throwing off her exhaustion and rushing toward the phone. The only emergency call she could think of was from the orphanage, where she worked as an assistant manager. The thought that something might have happened to the kids wrapped her in a wave of fear and urgency. "Hello," Marielle answered quickly, her voice sharp with urgency. Adir watched her closely as her expression shifted while she listened. The panic and fear on her face faded, replaced by irritation, then mild anger, and finally the exhaustion she had shown earlier returned. She let out a sigh, turned to Adir, and said flatly, "It's Victor." As he stood up and took the receiver from her, Marielle sank back into the couch, relief softening her features. "Victor?" Adir asked, holding the handset to his ear. It was the first time Victor had called him this late, and he had a strong feeling it was game-related. "Adir, did you get the helmet I sent?" Victor's voice came through, tinged with curiosity. "Yes." "So, did you play the game yet?" This time, there was a hint of tension in his voice, like he was worried. "Yes." There was a brief pause. "Tell me you didn't die in there," he said, now clearly anxious. "No, I didn't." "Why?" Adir replied, his curiosity growing. "Hell yeah, I knew it. You're among the 1%. Victor's voice shifted instantly, all worry gone, replaced by almost childish excitement. 1%? What's that supposed to mean? Didn't you check the internet? Everyone's talking about it on the forums, Victor said, clearly surprised by the question. "Victor, we're in the middle of a blackout. There's no internet right now," Adir explained, internally sighing. Of course, Victor hadn't considered that. "Oh right, so that's why I had to bribe the central station just to get connected through the emergency line," Victor muttered, as if something suddenly made sense. "Anyway, you'll see once the power comes back. I just called to let you know you only get one life in the game. If you die, it's over. You can't play again." Then, after a brief pause, his tone shifted more serious, more deliberate. "There's something else I need to tell you, but not over the phone. Meet me early tomorrow at the library. I have to go now." He sounded rushed, and before Adir could get a word in, Victor added one last thing. And one more thing. Be careful when logging out. Your avatar stays in the game unconscious. If you leave it in the wrong place, it can still be killed. Find a safe spot before you exit. Bye." With that, the line went dead, leaving Adir staring at the phone, stunned. "I miscalculated," Adir thought, tasting the bitter sting of his mistake. The mission he'd given the NPC, meant solely to understand its nature, had completely backfired. Now, knowing that his real body was lying there defenseless, waiting to be torn apart by a horde of skeletons, he realized everything had been left to luck. He had no control over the outcome, and he hated that to his core. Or is it? He chuckled quietly as he hung up the receiver and turned back toward the table. When Marielle saw that he had ended the call, she considered asking what could have been so important for Victor to use the emergency line, but she held back. She wasn't the kind of parent who poked around in her children's private lives, and she knew better than most how reckless teenagers could be, so she let it slide. Soon, her tired eyes began to close, and in the soft candlelit room, as the low murmur of her children studying filled the space, she drifted into a quiet, peaceful sleep. Morning light poured through the window as Adir slowly opened his eyes and sat up in bed. He glanced at the wristwatch resting on his desk. 6 a.m. The first thing he did was check if the power had returned. Sure enough, the game helmet's indicator light was on. It had begun charging. According to the manual, a full charge took exactly 3 hours, the same as one in-game session. It also didn't allow play while charging, and although Adir briefly wondered why a device this advanced didn't support fast charging, there was nothing he could do about it. Since there was no need to rush, he stood by the window for a few minutes, watching the sun rise. Afterward, he did a light stretch, visited the bathroom for his usual morning routine, and then headed downstairs. The house was quiet. No one else was awake yet. He made himself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, then set the table and prepared a simple breakfast for the family. Afterward, he returned to his room and opened his laptop, logging into the most popular local social media platform. He wasn't surprised to see the game trending across Shelter City 9. He didn't have access to networks beyond the city. The internet was strictly local, but he had a feeling it wasn't any different in the other cities either. He quickly skimmed through some of the top posts and noticed something striking. Over 99% of the comments were negative. Sure enough, everyone, without exception, had nothing but praise for the realism and full dive immersion, calling it a technology decades ahead of its time. But as a game, most found it disappointing, even infuriating. The biggest complaint: many players had died before they even had the chance to do anything. Right after spawning, Adir clicked on one of the most viewed posts. At Apocalypse Survivor, are the devs messing with us? Right after choosing my path, I literally fell from the sky into an active volcano. I didn't even get to move before I died. And the worst part, it felt real. I can still feel the pain of burning alive. I want my money back. Actually, no, I want compensation for the psychological trauma they gave me. That was just one of hundreds of similar comments below. At Wallet Breaker, dude, you should consider yourself lucky. At least yours was a quick death. I spawned in a dark forest. 5 minutes later, a pack of wolves tore me apart, slowly. I couldn't even log out. I had to sit there and die in pieces, not pieces. And of course, a few trolls in the mix. At Granimage, you bunch of losers couldn't even last 2 seconds. I survived exactly 30 minutes floating in the middle of the ocean before a shark got me. I'm obviously part of the top 10%. As Adir kept reading, it finally clicked. This was what Victor meant by the 1%. Apparently, players had turned their trauma and frustration into a ranking system. They started humorously measuring survival time as a badge of honor, jokingly assigning percentile brackets based on how long they stayed alive. Those who had survived without dying, like Adir, were being labeled the top 1%. He also came across a few more pieces of information that caught his attention. It seemed everyone had experienced the same initial sequence, choosing one of the 4 paths in the sky, but there was no mention anywhere of a 5th path. Another thing that stood out was the stat system. Each player seemed to receive only one stat, directly tied to the path they had chosen. For example, those who picked the Astra path were granted physique, while those who chose the Nether received resilience. This made Adir's situation unique. His character panel showed all 4 stats, a clear sign that the path he had taken was something entirely different. But perhaps the most intriguing detail was the lack of any discussion about physical changes in real life. No one mentioned getting stronger by increasing their in-game stats or experiencing mutations, like Adir had. There were only 2 explanations. Either no one else had undergone those changes, or they were keeping it quiet. Adir strongly believed it was the latter. After browsing the internet a little longer and gathering all the information he could, Adir closed his laptop. He noticed the campus shuttle would arrive in 15 minutes, so he quickly changed into his uniform, packed his notes and textbooks into a leather satchel, and finally grabbed the box containing the game helmet Selena had sent before heading downstairs. "Good morning, son." Heading out, his mother, Muriel, greeted him from the breakfast table, where she and Neva were already seated and eating. "Yeah, are you staying home today?" Adir asked as he slipped on his shoes and tied the laces. Muriel took a sip of her tea and sighed deeply before answering, "I wish. A new group of kids is arriving today. I might be home late again." Her voice was tired, but her eyes said otherwise. They sparkled with quiet joy. She never complained when it came to the orphanage. The more children they managed to rescue from the chaos outside, the more peace she seemed to find within herself. He said his goodbyes to Muriel and Neva, then stepped outside. The sky, usually choked with dense yellow clouds, felt lighter today. Rays of sunlight pierced through the thinning veil, casting warmth and light on the scarred earth below. It was still an apocalyptic morning, like so many before it, but something in the air hinted at renewal, as if the world itself was holding its breath for a fresh beginning. The shuttle arrived before Adir had to wait long, and he took the first empty seat he could find. The faces inside were all the same as always, tired, hollow, and worn thin by the silent scream of uncertainty about their futures. Adir knew each one carried a noisy story beneath that quiet mask. He watched, always watched, a nervous tap of a finger, a smudge on a collar, The way someone's gaze lingered a second too long, every detail spoke. Within a year, he'd stitched together their inner lives from the smallest of tells. Breakfast routines, favorite colors, secret fears they'd never voiced aloud. To others, they were classmates. To him, they were case files open, bleeding, waiting to be read. Watching them wasn't just a habit, it was instinct, an itch in his brain he never tried to scratch. And among them, there was one person Adair had given a special place in his quiet routine. Like a treasured book he returned to with a cup of coffee on a rainy day. His name was Aaron. Towering at 205 meters with the build of a seasoned bodybuilder, he was the tallest among them. One glance was enough to sense his raw strength. It was hard not to wonder if he carried mutant genes. Just how much more powerful could he become? His head was nearly shaved. Black hair cropped so close it looked like a shadow clinging to his scalp. His dark green eyes were sharp and cold, perfectly aligned with the hard, unforgiving lines of his face. He was the kind of man people avoided on instinct, someone you'd cross the street to escape from. Even the wealthy mutant students, known for their arrogance, often thought twice before provoking him. But only Adair knew what lived beneath that monstrous exterior, the quiet grief, the unbearable solitude, and the tragedy that had carved him into what he'd become. As he quietly enjoyed the morning, the shuttle gradually slowed and came to a stop at the final station, the campus terminal. Without rushing, Adair stepped off when it was his turn and made his way across campus with brisk steps. But instead of heading to the library, where he was supposed to meet Victor, he turned toward the cargo building. Like all the other structures on campus, the cargo facility was massive. Its architecture reminded Adair of ancient Roman design, monumental, cold, and proud. Above its grand entrance, written in bold gold and deep blue letters, was a name that caught every eye: Ravencourt Logistics, the only privately run cargo company still operating across the 12 cities. And not just a company name, but the surname of one of the most powerful and historic families left in the world. As he stepped inside, the massive glass door slid shut behind him with a hiss. He removed his mask and glasses, then passed through the second door and took in the filtered, purified air. It was early, so the lobby wasn't crowded. He walked over to the digital kiosk and took a number. Before he even had a chance to sit down, a soft chime sounded, and his number flashed on the screen above a booth. He approached the counter with quick steps. "I want to send this cargo," he said through the thick glass. The staff member looked up politely. "Hello, sir. Is this for a local delivery or to another city?" "Local," Adair replied as he slid the box through the small opening beneath the booth. He then handed over his student ID and filled in the recipient's address. On the form the clerk passed to him. "That'll be 45 credits, sir," the clerk said once everything was finalized. For a brief moment, Adair felt the sting in his chest, but he didn't show it. 45 credits for a simple local delivery. It was nearly half of his monthly scholarship. Without a word, he raised his wristwatch to the scanner. The payment confirmed with a soft beep, and he took the printed receipt before turning to leave. His next stop was the library. It was the largest building on campus, towering over the university grounds compared to the cargo facility. Its architecture was far more modern. The entire front facade was made of glass, opaque from the outside, but offering a clear, panoramic view for those inside. Adair stepped through the same-to-door procedure, removed his glasses and mask, and entered. The interior was vast. After walking through the main hall and taking the elevator up to the 7th floor, he arrived at the enclosed terrace. Several tables were spread out, and a few groups of students were already chatting quietly. This was one of the most popular spots in the library, a common meeting ground for those who wanted a balance of quiet and company. "Adair," he turned to see Victor approaching with long, confident strides. With each step, his ponytailed blonde hair bounced slightly, and his signature smug expression sat firmly beneath his half-lidded, light brown eyes. Adair didn't say anything at first. He just stepped forward, without missing a beat. Their shoulders bumped firm, practiced, like a ritual between old friends. "Yo, Victor," Adair said afterward, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Always late," Victor replied with a smirk, already turning toward an empty table like he owned the place. But then he paused, reconsidering. "You know what, let's get a private room." Apparently, whatever he wanted to talk about wasn't meant for wandering eyes or curious ears. Adair didn't argue. He simply followed. They took the elevator to the 6th floor, where private study rooms were reserved for students. Victor picked one without hesitation. He scanned the digital panel beside the door with his watch, an extravagant piece, embedded with polished stones, and rented the room for 100 credits an hour. The door unlocked with a soft beep, and they stepped inside. The room was generously sized, easily dwarfing Adier's bedroom back home. Heavy black curtains covered the tall window that would have otherwise offered a clear view of the campus below. In the center stood a broad desk, flanked by 3 high-end laptops, and off to the side, a neatly made bed waited, no doubt meant for students pulling all-nighters. Victor didn't waste time with small talk. He dropped into a comfortable-looking chair and got straight to the point. "So, how long did you play the game?" Adier pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. 3 hours until the device ran out of battery." "You played until it was completely drained?" Victor asked, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "I hope you logged out somewhere safe." "I'll be fine," Adier replied confidently, even if he wasn't entirely sure. Deep down, he knew the situation he left behind, chaotic as it was, might still have an opening for escape. "Good," Victor said, visibly relieved, fully believing him. Then his eyes sharpened with curiosity. "So, did you notice the game's, let's say, real unique feature? Aside from the hyper-realistic visuals and sensations." Adier immediately understood what he meant, without a word. He picked up a solid-looking metal pen from the desk and snapped it in half with his thumb clean. "Effortless." "Yeah," he said. "I discovered the gene mutation mechanic." Victor's eyes widened, his brown irises gleaming with excitement. He let out a short laugh. "Ha! Of course you did. You're really part of the top 5%. "Top 5? Adier raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't it 1%? That was last night. The number's already dropped," Victor replied with a smirk. "I'm sure more players are dying even as we speak." Victor shifted into a more relaxed position in his chair and added, "And even fewer have realized what you did. That increasing your stats actually affects your real body." Adier went quiet for a moment, then asked, "It's insane. What kind of game alters your physical body just by playing it?" Victor shrugged. "I don't know. Even my father was shocked when he found out yesterday." "Even your father?" Adier asked, not hiding his surprise. "Yeah. And he said not even the 12 city lords fully understand what this game really is." He paused for a beat. He said it felt like something touched by alien hands. A tense silence settled over the room for a moment before Victor spoke again, his voice lower, now more serious. "Look, Adier, I know I'm the one who dragged you into this game, but I had no idea how deep it went, or how dangerous it really is. You're not just my best friend, you saved my life once. And I brought you in because I wanted you to have a real shot at what this world could offer." He paused, took a breath, then continued. "But that's not why I asked you here today. You need to see the full picture now. This isn't just a game, it's something much bigger. And the risks, they're real." His words were as heavy as his tone, and he made no effort to soften them. He needed Adier to truly understand the weight of the situation. But there was another reason behind his insistence. He knew Adier too well. He was the type who'd go out of his way to help others, yet never ask for help himself. Even if something went wrong, he'd deal with it quietly, carrying the burden alone. And that was exactly what frustrated Victor. The idea of Adier facing something serious in silence, without reaching out, was something he refused to let happen. "I understand. Don't worry," Adier said with a light chuckle, playing his part flawlessly. "And you know better than anyone I like risks." "Yeah, I know," Victor replied, letting out a deep breath. "That's exactly why I'm being this serious." His mind drifted, just for a moment, to that night staring down the barrel of a gun, his life hanging by a thread, and the guy who came out of nowhere, risking everything to save him. "My father is setting up a new division outside the STF Superhuman Task Force," Victor said calmly. "He's planning to recruit third-generation mutants for it." "Third-generation mutants," Adier repeated, raising an eyebrow. As far as he knew, there were only 2 kinds. The first were natural-born mutants, those who had lived outside the cities, exposed to extreme radiation. Their altered genes were passed down over generations. The second were measured ones, engineered under strict clinical supervision, usually commissioned by the wealthy and powerful within the cities. Victor and the other rich students belonged to this second group. "Is he planning to recruit surviving players?" Adier asked directly, taking a wild guess. Victor nodded, then continued. "The facility will be ready in a few days. The government's pouring money into it, no expense spared. I'm thinking of joining the division myself, and I want you to be part of it too." He paused for a moment, then quickly added to prevent any misunderstanding. "Don't worry, it's not something that'll tie you down, I promise. On my father's name. There won't be any assignments that go against your principles. This is strictly for your benefit." He leaned forward slightly, his tone more focused now. "From what I've seen in the initial plans, the facility offers way more than what an average player needs. It'll be a place for information exchange about the game, maybe even deeper things. And most importantly, they're planning to grant official status to players who join." Victor's eyes met his. "In other words, if you accept, you'll have the chance to earn a surname." Adir fell into deep thought. The offer was intriguing, especially the part about earning a surname. He'd never been particularly fixated on having one, but the advantages that came with it were far from insignificant. "You can think about it and let me know later," Victor said with a laugh. "I'm not pushing you on this one." "Yeah, just like you didn't push me into playing the game," Adir replied with a smug grin. "You always know how to dangle the right candy." "That," Victor froze for a second, his lips twitching. "That wasn't my intention, okay?" He looked genuinely guilty, cornered by the truth. "I'm just messing with you," Adir said, letting him off the hook. Then, checking his watch, he added, "We don't have much time before class starts. Let's get going before we're late." As he got up and was about to leave the room, something crossed his mind. He turned back and asked, "Any chance you've heard Latin before?" But Victor just looked at him, clearly oblivious, no idea what it even was. After the first class history where Adir failed to get the answers he was looking for about Latin, the rest of the day's lessons felt dull and pointless. At one point, he considered skipping the remaining classes and heading home to dive back into the game. But the next shuttle wouldn't come until evening, and skipping classes was a dangerous move for someone in his position. Losing his scholarship would jeopardize more than just his education, it would damage the identity he had carefully built. He also noticed fewer students in class than usual, which made him wonder about the game's growing impact. Some were probably still playing. Others might have stayed home, trying to recover from the all-too-real trauma the game had inflicted. By the time the day was over, he was running low on patience. He boarded the shuttle and finally made his way home. At last, he'd get to see the outcome of where he'd left off in the game. The moment the shuttle doors slid open, a giant of a man stepped out. He didn't waste a second, his long, purposeful strides cutting through the street like he was racing against time. As the evening sky darkened, the few people still lingering on the sidewalks instinctively turned to look. By now, they were used to the sight, and so was Aaron. He didn't slow down, didn't say a word. He moved through the dimming streets, reached his worn front door, and stepped inside without a pause. "I'm home," he said, his voice softest than anyone would expect from someone built like him. He stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle. Somewhere deep down, he was still waiting, still hoping for a reply. But once again, he was reminded that hope had died long ago. Buried in silence, he quickly removed his mask and protective goggles, then stepped into the living room. A warm, familiar smile spread across his face as he spoke. "Sister, did you get hungry?" The room was the largest and the house bright, spotless, and carefully maintained. At its center stood a hospital bed, surrounded by softly humming medical equipment. Lying there was a girl, motionless but awake, her pale green eyes locking onto Aaron's as he entered. For a brief moment, they lit up with joy, speaking in place of the voice she no longer had. A breathing mask covered her mouth, hiding the faint smile beneath. But that wasn't why she stayed silent. She hadn't spoken in years. Her body, slowly breaking down with each passing day, had long since taken that from her. "Just wait a bit, I'll change my clothes first, then make us some dinner," Aaron said, using the softest tone he could manage, careful to keep a bit of distance from the girl. He was afraid that his dusty clothes from outside might somehow harm his already fragile sister. Without hesitation, he rushed to the bathroom and changed into something clean. When he came in, he was wearing an apron over his white pajamas. "How are you feeling? Any pain?" he asked, his voice tender. When her eyes gave him the usual signal, "I'm fine," he nodded and quickly hurried back to the kitchen. As Mira listened to the clattering of pots and utensils coming from the kitchen, she quietly waited for her favorite daily routine. And finally, her brother's voice reached her. "Today, the first class was history. The same professor I told you about before, you know. The really old one." There was a brief pause, followed by the soft sound of plates being set down. "I swear, he's so old I wouldn't be surprised if he had a few skeletons for friends." A faint smile tugged at Mira's lips. The joke wasn't all that funny, but she loved how her usually serious brother kept trying anyway, always making the effort, and always failing in the most endearing way. As Aaron prepared the meal, he recounted every detail of his day, as if determined not to let a single moment of silence settle in the house. His sister had already spent the day trapped in it, and if he couldn't take the silence from her world, he could at least keep it out of this room. It was the only thing he had left to give. Soon, he returned with 2 bowls of soup, the warmth gently rising into the still air. He fed her with steady hands, 1 spoonful for her, then 1 for himself from his own bowl. It was a simple rhythm, one they'd repeated countless times, and he kept talking, calmly and naturally, only pausing when his mouth was full. It wasn't just to fill the silence, it was his way of making the moment feel normal, familiar, just like when they were kids, before their father died of a chronic illness, and before their mother took her own life out of grief, or at least, back when his sister was still healthy, before she was diagnosed with the same inherited disease that had taken their father. Now, as Aaron watched her grow weaker each day, inching closer to the same fate, he hated it. He questioned what kind of brother he was if he couldn't even take away her pain. But what could he do? He was built like a giant, strong in every way that didn't matter. The university he had fought so hard to get into, the one he'd entered with a single purpose, wasn't helping. None of it was helping. Nothing could stop the disease eating her away. The only thing that could make a difference now was enough status, and money to afford a genetic mutation procedure that might save her life. But time was running out, and hope was already gone. After the meal, Aaron took care of her needs. He cleaned the bed sores on her back, massaged her motionless limbs, and checked the fuel in the generator, the only real support the university had ever provided. Then he went upstairs to change for work. The 100 credits he received as a scholarship barely covered her daily care and medication. So at night, he put his naturally gifted strength to use, working grueling shifts as a construction laborer. Once he was ready, he returned to her door, careful not to step too close. "Mira, I'm heading to work. Try to get some sleep, okay?" he said cheerfully. Mira looked at her brother. It was the hardest moment of her day. Every night, at this exact time, she ate to speak, to beg him to stop. "Brother, it's enough. You've done everything you could. Just let me go. Live your life." But the words never came. They couldn't. So she gave him the only thing she had left, a big, heartfelt smile, one she saved only for him. Aaron returned her smile with one of his own, a wide, comforting grin he had mastered over the years. Then he laced up his worn-out work boots and stepped outside. After locking the door behind him, he paused. The smile that had lit up his face moments ago was gone, and the energy he carried so well had vanished without a trace. It was as if the reality he kept forcing himself to ignore had come crashing back all at once. He leaned against the wall, then slowly slid down until he was sitting on the cold ground. Suddenly, the giant became painfully small. Silent tears escaped his eyes, followed by a shaky breath, then a stifled sob. He prayed in that moment, just like he did every day. Prayed for a miracle to turn his shattered life around, a miracle to save his sister. He'd heard the stories, read the accounts. He knew miracles weren't just legends, they were real. Even his mother used to say, miracles can come in any form, of course. That was before she took her own life. Still, he held on to that belief, because believing that a miracle could happen at any moment was the only way he could keep going. It was the only thing that made the weight bearable. As silent thoughts flooded his mind, his sobs gradually broke the stillness, raw, unfiltered. And then, through the quiet night, another voice slipped into the sound of his grief. "Mr. Aaron." Startled, he quickly lifted his head, wiping his eyes, ashamed to be seen like this. Standing before him was a middle-aged man dressed in a blue and gold uniform. But what truly caught Aaron off guard was the emblem on his chest, Ravencourt Logistics. "Sorry," the man said, glancing down at his notes, equally surprised to see the broken figure before him. "Are you the one residing in this house?" "Yes, I'm Aaron," he replied, still trying to collect himself. "What is this about?" "You have a delivery," the man said simply, extending a box toward him. Aaron stared at it blankly, unaware that the miracle he'd been praying for had just arrived in a box. When Adir returned home, he didn't jump straight into the game. First, he had the dinner Neva had prepared, then washed the dishes afterward, as she had begged him to. He helped her with her studies. With the big exam approaching, Niva's stress had been steadily growing, and since she knew she performed best when studying with her brother, she had been bugging him more than usual lately. As the clock ticked into the late evening, Adir finally made his way to his room. He started by fixing the broken door handle with whatever tools he had on hand. making sure he wouldn't be disturbed. Then he changed the melted candle from the night before, lit a fresh one, and placed it where the light wouldn't bother him. Before logging in, he repeated the same exercises he had done yesterday to better understand his strength. Though bodyweight training no longer did much for him physically, it still helped him control and measure his power. And during that process, he realized something else. When he first started the game, his physical stat was 2. Considering he'd been doing strength training since he was a child, it made sense. If someone without any training had a stat of 1, then being twice as strong aligned with what he knew about himself. Based on that, he began to suspect that the average person's base stats, physical and possibly the others as well, might all start at 1. That is, if the game's stats truly reflected reality. After finishing his physical and mental routine, he grabbed the now fully charged helmet, placed it on his head, and lay down on the bed. The screen went pitch black. Then, once again, glowing neon green numbers began to count down. 3, 2, 1. When his vision returned, the familiar interior of the prison came into view. There was only one thing this could mean: the one escape scenario he had hoped for had come true. But something was off. Vesha was nowhere to be seen. In the scenario he had imagined, she should have been here with him, trapped in the prison as skeletons clawed at the cell bars trying to get in. Wondering what had happened to her, Adir looked around, scanning for any detail that might explain her absence. The cell he was in now wasn't the one where he'd found Vesha, it was 2 cells over. And this one had a working door, intact and shut. Adir kicked the rusted, centuries-old door open with a single strike. Unlike the 3 dramatic, prolonged kicks he had used on Vesha's cell door purely for show, this one broke apart instantly. With just one, he then walked 2 cells down to where he had originally found her, and began inspecting the area carefully. Whatever had happened, the answers were here in the details left behind. This is where I dropped, face first, after the logout. He knelt, fingers brushing the damp earth. And here, this is where she saw me. Crawled forward, then stopped. Adir moved in closer, studying the trail she had left behind. The soil was still damp, the markings faint but readable. There's a trace hesitation. She was moving toward me to check, but something startled her. Fear, maybe, or shock. Probably heard something. Skeletons rushing this way. She panicked, acted. She grabbed my legs, dragged me 2 cells over. She struggled, but she got there. Impressive, for a girl who had no energy left. Must have been adrenaline. Adir paused, something bothering him as he replayed the trail in his mind. Something didn't add up. She didn't go in, just closed the door behind. Why? Did she think she could outrun them? No, that's not like her. He frowned and began following the footprints that continued past the cell. She walked straight in the direction skeletons came. He traced the prints farther, until they collided with another set deeper, heavier, skeletal. At their intersection, he found a dark patch of blood pooled on the ground. So this is what happened. Adir crouched, touching the still wet stain as the truth settled in. She pulled me in, thinking the bars wouldn't hold them. Then she sealed the door and ran, not to escape, but to draw their attention away. A flicker of something crossed his otherwise blank face. Why go that far? For a moment, a scene flashed through his mind. The moment he took the purple crystal, and the look on Vesha's face. What did she see in me? Who did she think I was? To make that trade, her life for mine? He murmured, staring at the crimson staining his fingers. It's a drip pattern, non-lethal. The blood's dark, likely venous, judging by the position. It came from the arm or a shallow chest wound. The volume, not enough to kill, even for someone as small as her. Thankfully, Adir's questions might not go unanswered. He knew Vesha hadn't died, not yet. Anyway, he didn't know why the skeletons had taken Vesha or where. But that was a question he could answer once he found her. So without wasting time, he got to his feet and followed the trail, navigating the cave's labyrinthine paths with practiced ease. He moved forward, here and there. He spotted fresh blood mixed with skeletal footprints and drag marks, along with signs of a struggle. Far from alarming, these were encouraging. It meant Vesha was still alive. After progressing for a while and dispatching a few wandering skeletons to absorb their crystals, Adir heard voices coming from the far end of the corridor. I command you in the name of God, Astrea, stay back, you vile creatures. The voice was desperate, male, tangled with the sharp clash of weapons, and it was spoken in Latin. As Adir moved a little closer, he finally gained a clear line of sight to the source. The figure was short, no taller than 160 meters, and looked to be in his 20s. His eyes were wide like Vesha's, but instead of her icy blue, his were a deep black. He held a short sword in one hand, a round shield in the other, and wore armor that resembled medieval plate, metallic and protective, covering most of his body except the joints. Adir's first thought was that he might be one of the guards who had come with Vesha. 3 skeletons were attacking the man, pressing him hard. He looked exhausted and wounded, and the blunt weapons in the skeleton's hands gave them an edge against his round shield. The fight was nearing its end, the outcome already decided. Still, Adir had no intention of intervening. He simply watched. Before long, the man gave into exhaustion. His shield arm dropped, leaving his head exposed just in time to take a crushing blow. He collapsed, unconscious, but alive. To Adir's satisfaction, the skeletons didn't deliver a killing strike. Instead, they grabbed him and began dragging him away. They were taking him somewhere, and wherever that was, it was likely the place Adir needed to find. Adir spent half an hour silently tailing the skeletons as they dragged the man through the twisting tunnels. He remained hidden the entire time, avoiding any movement that might draw attention. At last, the path opened into a vast chamber. The space was so large that when Adir looked up, he saw countless blue crystals embedded in the ceiling, glowing like stars and casting a radiant light that illuminated the entire room like a false sun. As the skeletons continued dragging the man down a sloping side path into the lower level of the chamber, Adir took cover behind a large boulder and observed from above. This had to be their gathering place. Below, there were at least 100 skeletons, and that wasn't even the strangest part. Every single one of them was kneeling, arms raised, facing the same direction, as if in worship. And at the center of their collective focus, perched atop a stone platform, was a white bird. "What is this? The dungeon boss," he muttered, instincts shaped by old MMORPGs. But it was far too small to be one. As Adir studied the creature, plain at first glance, yet strangely ethereal, a familiar sight returned. Once again, green text flickered before his eyes, a system message, presenting new information. Spark detected. Name Dawn Raven. Path Astra. Rank 1. Ability Life Grace. Description: Dawn Ravens are born from the remains of the living on battlefields and inhabit bright, cold regions. They feed on fresh flesh and the life force of their prey. Though often mistaken for creatures of the nether path due to their abilities, their powers affect only matter, firmly aligning them with the Astra path. Typically sluggish and non-aggressive, they're easy to catch but rarely found alone. One must always be cautious of one's loyal guards. Ability Life Grace. Dawn Ravens are grateful sparks, known to repay kindness with power. In exchange for a meal, they offer a fragment of their unique life force, transforming their prey's physical bodies into living skeletons bound to their will, and granting them an unnaturally extended existence. As he read the description and looked at the raven, it hit him this was the spark Vesha had mentioned, the one she was after. One line in the description had especially caught his eye. At first, he'd assumed it was a boss to kill and loot, but the word catch shifted his perspective, and for the first time, the empty spark slot in his stat panel began to make sense. The game was still shrouded in mystery, if it even was a game at all, but he felt he had just peeled back another layer, a power system that included active skills. "Oh fuck, I don't want to be a necromancer. That's so cliché," he muttered, a trace of irritation flickering across his face as he thought through the skill's mechanics. But he quickly reminded himself it was too early to jump to conclusions. Besides, he had a more immediate problem in front of him. Tearing his gaze away from the raven, he noticed 2 bodies lying at the center of the skeleton gathering. The third, dragged all this way, was about to join them. One of the bodies belonged to a man, clad in metallic armor much like the other. The second was the one Adir had come for. Vesha lay semi-conscious, her eyes fluttering open now and then, fighting to hold on, struggling to stay aware of her surroundings through the fog of fading consciousness. Though still alive, Vesha looked deathly pale. She had already lost a significant amount of blood and was still bleeding. A dark red pool had begun to form beneath her. It was clear she didn't have much time, but what came next made it clear her blood loss was no longer the most pressing concern. Just as Adir had suspected, the skeletons dragging the third man didn't lay him beside the other 2. Instead, they marched forward, past the circle, toward the stone platform where the Dawn Raven perched. There, they placed the unconscious man at the bird's feet, then stepped back and dropped to their knees, raising their arms like the others in silent worship. It was unmistakably a ritual, a sacrifice. The Dawn Raven remained still for a moment, eyes fixed on the offering. Then, with a sharp, soundless cry, It spread its wings and glided down to the man's side. What followed was enough to freeze the blood of anyone with a conscience. With a sudden jab of its beak, the raven gouged out one of the man's eyes and swallowed it in a single, clean motion. Ugh! The searing pain jolted the man back to consciousness. He screamed, flailing, trying to escape the unknown torment, but the two skeletons flanking him pounced, pinning his limbs to the ground with an unyielding grip. "Let me go, you cursed fiends, let go!" But neither the skeletons nor the raven paid him any mind. The raven continued its work without pause. Each strike of its beak tore another piece of flesh from the man's body. Blood splattered across its white feathers, staining them deep red. The man's struggles grew weaker as the raven devoured him piece by piece until his body, organs, and all were nearly gone. Adir watched the entire scene with an unreadable expression. The carnage didn't faze him. If anything, his face showed faint disapproval. As he kept watching, the raven finally stopped, with blood-soaked wings spread wide. It released a soft beam of green light that fell over the mangled remains. The moment the ritual began, the kneeling skeletons around the chamber, who had until now been eerily still, began clacking their jaws. The sound echoed through the cavern like a chorus of bones, sharp and unsettling. Within seconds, the green light consumed every trace of blood and flesh. It burned like fire, reducing the remains to ash. Even the blood staining the raven's feathers turned to dust, revealing once more its pristine white plumage. Then, the real transformation began. The man's skeleton, the only part left untouched by the flame, started to shift. The bones thickened, took on a metallic sheen, and grew in proportion, his limbs lengthening, posture changing. His frame now matched the other skeletons. As the ritual's glow began to fade, a faint stream of green light branched off toward the two skeletons who had carried the offering. Their brittle, time-worn bones shimmered briefly, then grew denser, stronger, restored. The clatter of their jaws quickened, sharper now, echoing with something that almost resembled excitement. Moments later, the light vanished completely. The dawn raven folded its wings and returned to its perch atop the platform. Below, the freshly reborn skeleton slowly rose to its feet, only to kneel again, raising its arms toward the bird in solemn, wordless devotion. "Wow, that was quite a show," Adir remarked, eyes glinting with interest. "Especially the final act really captured the soul of it. Can't find that kind of drama in theaters these days." The devouring process hadn't exactly been to his taste. It was too messy, lacking elegance. Still, he had to admit the ending landed well. Like a seasoned critic, he offered a few mental notes before reeling his focus back to the matter at hand. Now, he had to clear objectives. First, he needed to rescue Vesha before she died. This wasn't out of sentiment, gratitude, or some misplaced sense of heroism. His interest in her survival was purely practical. Vesha had answers he needed, and more importantly, she held status in this world, particularly within the Velari kingdom. With her influence, Adir could carve out a new path for himself once they escaped this cave. The second objective was to capture the Dawn Raven. He didn't know exactly how rare or valuable it was, but the fact that Vesha and her guards had risked their lives just to find it told him enough things like this didn't appear often. Standing in the way of both goals were two major obstacles. The first was time. He had already spent half an hour tracking the skeletons and nearly another 20 minutes observing the ritual. If he didn't act within the remaining 2 hours or so, chances were high that by his next login, Vesha would no longer be human, but another skeleton in the horde. Besides, Adir had never been one for brute force heroics. He preferred something more calculated, more precise, not the brawler on the front lines, but the blade in the dark. After a few more minutes of calculating and planning, Adir finally settled on the tactic he would use. Now, he muttered with a faint smile, time to write the main character's entrance. His scene was about to begin. "I'm dying." As Vesha lay there, the thought rose in her mind with the same brutal weight as the pain crushing her chest. Each passing second drained more warmth from her body. She fought to stay conscious, forcing her eyes open, searching for anything, any thread of hope to pull her from this nightmare. But all she saw was horror. One of her loyal guards had just been devoured, only to rise again as a mindless skeleton. That was it, the final blow, the last crack in her hope. "I'm dying." The thought settled into her soul like an undeniable truth. There was nothing left but acceptance. She closed her eyes, and then she saw light in the darkness, a silhouette, tall, towering, taller than anyone she had ever seen in the entire kingdom. His face was cold, unreadable, yet the mask couldn't fully hide the warmth beneath. "Adir." At death's edge, Vesha whispered the name instinctively. In the void, she saw him not as he was, but as the hero of her fading mind, striding into the darkness like a knight from legend. A faint smile touched her pale lips, unaware she was dreaming. Why not? He was a practitioner, one not shaped by fate, but forged to walk his own path, the kind whose very presence brought peace to kingdoms and dread to their enemies. And if he was the one who chose to save her, then who in their right mind would dare stand against him? Now she could see it all clearly, the two of them, hand in hand, walking out of this cold cave, returning to the kingdom. She could see her father, standing tall in his favorite uniform, her mother beside him, adorned in her brightest jewels, both waiting at the city square, the cheering crowd, the jealous stares of her spiteful cousins. Even the king was there in person, with the queen by his side, bearing witness to the grand event. And there he was, tall, steady, revered by all, standing beside her, hand in hand. Then, with perfect clarity, she heard the voice of the high priest, smiling as he spoke. Under the watch of God Astraeus, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Then she turned to him. It was time. The moment of the kiss. She blushed as their eyes met, her heart fluttering. He parted his lips and spoke. Are you okay? She smiled, touched by his concern. Yes, I am. I'm so happy. As she tiptoed and moved closer for the kiss, eyes softly closing, his voice cut through clearer, firmer. Hey, open your eyes. Are you okay? I said I'm okay. Can you stop asking? She whispered, a hint of frustration in her tone. She closed her eyes again, tiptoeing forward to seal the kiss that would mark their union. But this time, she felt hands gripping her shoulders, shaking her. I said, open your eyes. You're not dead yet. At last, she truly returned to herself, back to reality. Adir was crouched in front of her, studying her with a strange look. Wow, he said with a faint smile. For a second there, I thought you were really gone. Though her body felt numb, cold as someone standing at death's door. Vesha's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She averted her eyes at first, then lifted her head again and asked in a shaky voice, Are you here to save me? But before he could answer, her awareness caught up with her surroundings. The circle of skeletons remained frozen in place, still locked in their eerie poses. One of her guards lay unconscious beside her, or more likely, dead, and the devil raven, the thing that would haunt her nightmares, still perched where it had been, calm and indifferent. She turned back to Adir. He didn't look like a savior from her fantasies, not like a hero descending from the light. He looked just like her, another prisoner, another offering. As Adir saw the questioning, anxious look in her eyes, he spoke calmly. Yes, I'm here to get you out, and don't worry, I've got a plan. He tore a few long strips from her dress and quickly pressed them against the wound on her chest, wrapping them tightly to slow the bleeding. All I need from you is to lie down and play dead. The Dawn Raven only feeds on life energy, and the skeletons don't offer lifeless bodies as sacrifices, Adir said quickly. It was the conclusion he'd reached after observing the previous ritual, and taking the description into account. But don't actually die, just pretend. Keep your mind awake. Given how much blood she'd already lost, he felt it necessary to add that part. After finishing the bandaging and making sure she was lying comfortably, using the dead soldier as a makeshift pillow, Adir settled in and began waiting for the next ritual. His plan was actually quite simple. He had intentionally let the patrolling skeletons catch him, just to be brought here, so he could check Vesha's wound and give her basic first aid. And once he was sure she'd survive a little longer, he would ensure that he was chosen for the next ritual. The moment he was closest to the Dawn Raven unguarded, exposed, he'd strike, catching it in a single move. He still wasn't entirely sure what would happen to the rest of the skeletons if he caught or eliminated the Dawn Raven, but for now, that was a detail he was willing to ignore. It's starting, Adir thought as he saw the two skeletons that had brought him here begin to move. His theory was correct. They didn't even glance at the other two bodies lying nearby. Their focus was solely on him, the one still radiating life energy. Be gentle, guys, Adir muttered, extending his arms for them to grab. As a sacrifice, he was well aware of his legal rights and the ritual rules he had to follow. As long as he played his part perfectly, everything would proceed as planned. The skeletons grabbed him by the arms and began dragging him toward the stone platform. Just like the previous offering, Adir looked up at the Dawn Raven, then knelt below the platform, mirroring the praying skeletons around him. He raised his arms, mimicking their posture precisely. One thing he'd observed earlier was how simple-minded the skeletons seemed. They behaved like programmed constructs, responding only to commands and acting within a fixed task-reward framework. As long as nothing violated their sense of protocol, they didn't intervene, and so far, they haven't. Seeing him kneel willingly, the two skeletons that had escorted him assumed he posed no threat. They lowered themselves beside him, adopting the same prayer-like position, with nothing left to block his move. Only one final step remained, letting the Dawn Raven get close enough. Under his watchful gaze, the raven slowly spread its wings and glided down from the platform. Drawing near, Adir didn't move. He simply stared, eyes locked on the creature. And as the Dawn Raven drew closer, he looked straight into its eyes, into those pitch-black eyes. What kind of creature are you? He couldn't help but wonder. He had looked into the eyes of countless beings before, human, animal, dead, living, and he had always known exactly what he was seeing, especially the eyes of someone whose soul was slipping away. Those were the moments he savored most. But now, staring into the Dawn Raven's eyes, what he saw caught him off guard. It wasn't life he saw. It wasn't death he felt. It was something familiar, something he'd seen before, but couldn't quite place. For a moment, he struggled to find the word, then it hit him. It felt familiar, and yet, he couldn't remember who they belonged to, because those eyes had never belonged to anyone else, only to him. The same eyes he saw staring back at him every time he looked in a mirror. "You're just like me, aren't you?" he said quietly, voice cold and calm. "A monster, just trying to survive the life forced on you." Then, without hesitation, he lunged forward, wrapping the strip of cloth, torn from Vesh's dress, tightly around the raven's wings and head, locking it down in a single, swift move. As he held the raven in his hands, he could feel the creature's heartbeat racing beneath its feathers. "Shh, don't be afraid. I'm not gonna hurt you," he said in a reassuring voice, gently stroking its wings. But just then, a sudden sense of danger struck him. He leapt back, barely dodging an axe that came down from above, missing him by inches. "What the hell? Don't you see I'm holding your god or whatever it is hostage? You want it dead," he shouted, quickly raising the raven high for all to see. Before he could even register the skeleton's reaction to his actions, a text prompt appeared before him. "You captured a spark. Do you want to start your evolution process? Cost, 20 energy. Rewards, evolutionary step, Dawn Human. Unlock Sanctuary. Unlock Spark." Adir gave the text a brief glance before dismissing it. This wasn't the moment for distractions. The moment the skeletons saw their precious Dawn Raven in his hands, they froze. Suddenly, everything went silent, not a single sound, as if the entire chamber had glitched out. Exactly as Adir had predicted, the skeletons, driven by basic instincts and limited logic, couldn't process the situation. Faced with something outside their protocol, they stalled, paralyzed by uncertainty. "Don't try anything smart, one move, and it dies," Adir warned as he began walking through the motionless skeletons. He had come here to play the main character, yet somehow felt more like a second-rate villain in a cheap play. Not that he minded, he was enjoying it more than he'd like to admit. Without interruption, he reached Vesh's side. "Are you awake?" he asked. At the sound of his voice, she slowly opened her eyes and mumbled, "Yes." But as Adir looked into her eyes, he could tell she wasn't fine. He could see it, the fading soul, the dimming life force slipping away. "You're a strong woman, right?" he said softly, placing the Dawn Raven gently in her lap. Then he guided her hands to hold it in place. "Just hold on to this for a while. I'm trusting you with it. Just hang in there a little longer, we're getting out of here." With that, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her like a princess, and began to walk. For a moment, Vesha felt his warmth seep into her frozen body. She tightened her grip around the thing in her arms. She didn't know what it was, but Adir had entrusted it to her, and she was determined to fulfill that duty before her time ran out. Adir noticed the small gesture. She was truly strong-willed, and even that one simple task might be enough to keep her holding on a little longer. Just before stepping out of the chamber, Adir paused and looked back one final time. The horde of skeletons stood motionless beneath the cold glow of the crystal, silent, helpless, stripped of all will. "I'll return for the purple crystals," he thought, eyes narrowing. But not today. Today, he walked away with something far more valuable. With Vesha in his arms and the Dawn Raven resting in hers, Adir navigated the maze-like cave with practiced ease. For him, the simplest way to find his path was through footprints. The cave's slightly damp soil, untouched by wind or weather, had preserved every step with perfect clarity, offering him a flawless guide through the stone corridors. During this time, the wandering skeletons in the corridors posed no threat. Just showing them the Dawn Raven was enough to short-circuit whatever logic they operated on. Meanwhile, Adir kept Vesha engaged, speaking to her to keep her mind active, anything to keep her awake, at least until he could be sure the bleeding from her chest had fully stopped, and her dehydrated body received some water and nourishment. Back in the prison area. "Why did you save me?" he asked. "Why risk your own life for mine?" His voice remained gentle, but firm enough to keep someone on the brink of sleep from slipping away. Vesha parted her pale, cracked lips, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. Her voice came out weak, heavy with exhaustion. "In the Church of Astra, the first 3 things they teach every follower are serve, obey, and sacrifice." Adir raised an eyebrow. "Serve who?" "The practitioners of the 4 paths," she replied, her words drawing out, slower with each syllable. "Practitioners. Am I a practitioner?" he asked, curiosity slipping into his tone. "You're tall." It was the 3rd time across both his lives that someone had called him tall, and all 3 times it had been her. But Adir didn't even react. The repetition wasn't a coincidence, it was a clear sign her mind was starting to slip. "Hey, stay with me," Adir said firmly, noticing her consciousness fading. Holding her steady while trying to move fast wasn't easy, but he pushed his pace as much as the terrain allowed. To make things worse, the charge on his game helmet was running low. If he didn't get out of the cave and reach a safe place soon, it wouldn't be just Vesha in danger, he would be, too. "Are you still holding the Dawn Raven? Make sure you don't drop it," Adir said, hoping to get some kind of response, and he did. "Raven." Vesha blinked open her tired eyes and glanced down at the bundle in her arms. A raven. She flinched at the sight of the very creature that had haunted her moments ago. Briefly shocked, but her grip didn't loosen. She held it tight. Adir chuckled. At least it worked. It had pulled her back, even just a little. It might be enough to keep her mind busy for a while longer. And the exit wasn't far now. He could feel the shift in the air, the still, heavy atmosphere of the cave broken by a faint breeze brushing against his skin. They were close. And then came the light at the end of the tunnel. "We're out. Look, the light," he said. But when he noticed her eyes glued to the raven, watching its every move with tense concentration, he decided to leave her be. Stepping outside, the air greeted him like a forgotten memory, crisp and clean. It rushed into his lungs, so pure it stung a little. But the sting wasn't unpleasant. It was oddly satisfying. His chest rose slowly as he took it in, and for a brief moment, he just stood there, letting the scent of damp earth and wild grass flood his senses. Then, lifting his gaze, he saw it, the sky. Night had fallen, yet overhead hung not a moon, but a sun. Not warm, not golden. It glowed in quiet defiance of the darkness, wrapped in drifting shades of black and white, monochrome and unreal, like a pale, lidless eye staring through a veil of smoke. Unfamiliar, wrong, a sun, or a moon, that didn't belong to any sky he'd ever known. To the right, the forest began. The ground was covered in lush green grass, and 2 lively creatures were grazing peacefully. They looked like horses, but their fur was a deep blue, patterned with white spots that resembled stars in the night sky. Their manes were dark, like shadows, as if the night itself had brushed over them. Not far from them stood a carriage, wooden, but well-crafted and elegant in design. On its side was a crest Adir recognized. "This must be their carriage," he murmured, glancing at Vesha. The crest was the same one he had seen engraved on the breastplates of the warriors inside the cave. Without wasting time, Adir carried Vesha toward the carriage. He pulled back the canvas flap and stepped inside. It seemed like a good shelter, the animals grazing calmly outside and the untouched carriage, clearly undisturbed for at least 3 days, were enough to convince him this place was safe. The interior was clean and surprisingly comfortable. He laid her down gently on a soft blanket, then checked her wound. The bandage was dry, no new blood. That was a good sign. The bleeding had stopped. He started searching the space. In one corner, he found small leather flasks filled with water. In another, a box containing food supplies. Inside a smaller compartment, he discovered a pouch of white powder. A quick taste confirmed it was salt. He added a pinch of it to the flask, then crushed a few hard, lemon-flavored candies into powder and mixed them in too. After shaking the flask well, he returned to Vesha. Her eyes were open, still fixed on the raven, but now they seemed to drift, her focus slipping. "Hey, can you look at me?" Adir asked, helping her sit up slightly. "I want you to drink this, but first, I need you to talk to me." He wanted to be sure her reflexes were intact. Giving her water when she couldn't swallow properly would only risk choking her. A stupid way to die after coming this far. "I'm not thirsty, just tired," Vesha said weakly, her gaze shifting to the flask. Just a little, can you do it for me? He said gently, and without waiting for an answer, let a few drops fall into her mouth. She managed to swallow. That was enough, after days of nothing. Something with real nutrients was finally reaching her system. She still looked like she could die at any moment, but at least now, there was a chance. Adir checked the mental timer, roughly half an hour left. He gave her a bit more water, then carefully replaced the non-sterile bandages with clean fabric he'd found inside the carriage. He even changed her torn and dirty clothes, down to her underwear. Using a spare set he'd come across, once he was done, he lay her down, covered her tightly, and stepped outside. Wasting no time, he started a fire, using the camp supplies and whatever vegetables and meat he'd found, edible or at least they looked it. He threw together a quick soup in a large pot. After a small taste, he couldn't help but briefly acknowledge his own cooking skills with a nod of approval. Even the system agreed, sending a message acknowledging his cooking talent. He dismissed it without a second thought, not enough energy to register it, anyway. Then, without delay, he brought the pot back into the carriage. The air was a little cold, and it would only get colder as night fell. The heat from the soup might help warm the space, even if just a little, and with any luck, the smell of food might lead Vesha into better dreams. If she woke up hungry while he was gone, well, that was a bonus he'd planned for. Once everything was in place, Adir lay down beside her. He made sure their bodies shared enough warmth, with roughly 10 minutes of charge left. There was no point in dragging it out. He'd done everything he could. The rest was in fate's hands. Fuck fate, Adir muttered and logged out.